All right. Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Moran, and I'm a special education here at State Support Team 11. First and foremost, we want to thank Mr. Martinez for his time today in relaying what we feel in the special education world, but just as educators, practitioners, is a very important subject as we help our students transition into that post-secondary life. We're thankful you all could join us and are beyond excited to have this content and discussion available to you around the supported decision-making model with Jonathan Martinez. Jonathan is a senior director for law and policy at the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University, leading its efforts to ensure older adults and people with disabilities have access to services and supports they need to live independent and inclusive lives. In 2013, Jonathan represented Margaret Jenny Hatch in the Justice for Jenny case, the first trial to hold that a person has the right to use supported decision-making to make her own life choices instead of being subjected to a permanent plenary guardianship. Since then, Jonathan has worked with tens of thousands of people, families, and professionals across the country on ways to increase education, employment, independent living outcomes for individuals with disabilities. We at the SST feel very privileged to be able to partner for the second year in a row with Mr. Martinez on this learning series and want to extend our gratitude to him for being here. We encourage your participation, questions, and discussion. You can either enter them into the chat function or use the raise a hand function, and we'll do our best to make sure they can be addressed. The second session will also be available for learning extension and questions and answers. If there are certain topics you want to hear more about, please email me directly, and Jonathan and I will meet to debrief and go over some of the feedback we got to make sure that the second session is as meaningful to you as possible. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I am absolutely honored to be back for the second year to talk to you about what I believe is the greatest advance in human and civil rights for people with disabilities since the Americans with Disabilities Act. What we're going to be talking about today and going forward in this series is supported decision-making. Now, if you've heard of supported decision-making, or SDM, you've probably heard about it as an alternative to guardianship. Something you can do instead of putting a person in guardianship, something you can do to get out of a guardianship. And that's certainly true. And we are going to talk about that today. And I'm sure we'll talk about it on the other days that we meet. But what I really want to stress to you about supported decision-making is that it's more than just something you do with a guardian, more than something you do at one point in time when you're deciding whether or not guardianship is appropriate. What I hope you're going to learn, whether you are a parent, a teacher, a practitioner, or all of them, is that what supported decision-making can do for the people in your lives, for the people you care about, for the people you teach, the people you support, is make their lives better. My goal in this presentation is to help you understand that supported decision-making is consistent with things that you already believe. So incorporating it into what you already do is a really easy step, and there's a very good chance that you're already doing it to some extent. So with that said, like I said, you're going to hear me talk about today, especially supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. But I always, before I begin any presentation about guardianship, I always make two promises to the audience. I'm going to make them to you now. Promise number one: you're never going to hear me say that there should never be guardianship. If you are a parent who is a guardian or considering guardianship, I'm not here to call you wrong-minded or evil or wrong. If you're a teacher or a practitioner that's ever recommended guardianship, I'm not here to tell you you did the wrong thing. What I'm here to tell you and talk to you about are options, are information that you can use if you're ever faced with that decision, whether or not to recommend guardianship or seek guardianship or continue guardianship, so that you can make the best choice, the best recommendation that meets the needs of the person that you're working with. That's promise number one. Promise number two goes like this. Everything you hear me talk about today and going forward is going to have a basis in one of two things: law, including the law of your state in Ohio, and science. The things that we're talking about are not vaporware. They're not some concept that's just out there in the ether where I'm going to tell you about all the things you should do. No. I am going to focus on things that have been proven and things that have worked, both in Ohio, by the way, and across the country. So with those promises in mind, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to begin. So what I want to start with, what I want you to think about from the very beginning is something that people don't really think that much about, and that is their rights. This is part one of the presentation today, all about the whys and the rights. We're going to do two things today, just as a quick signpost. We're going to do about an hour or so, based upon whether you have questions or not, about background on supported decision-making, why it is, how it is, why you should consider it. The second part of today is going to be about how you can implement it, ways that you can seek to use supported decision-making in your life and the life of someone you care about, and ways to incorporate supported decision-making into supports and services like special education supports and others. So as we begin, the first thing to think about is rights. And I do want you to look at that question up on your screen. I know it's a goofy sounding one. What's your favorite right? I know it's a strange thing to ask because it sounds kind of like a pickup line at an ACLU convention, but I want you really to think about it. There are rights that are dear to us, that are important to us, that make us who we are. What are the ones that are that for you? Is it things like freedom of speech? Freedom of religion, freedom of elections? We just passed election day after all. Is it the basic right from our Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, those are the rights, I think, that make us who we are as a nation and as a people. Well, think for a second, what do they all have in common? They all have choice in common. Freedom of speech is the right to choose what to say and the right to choose what not to say. Freedom of elections, the right to choose who will govern us. Freedom of religion, the right to choose how and where and whether we worship. Freedom of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to choose how and where and with whom we live our lives. So to me, choice is the right that makes everything real, that makes everything possible. There's a quote up on your screen from a philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre who gets it right. He says, I am my choices, because you all, everyone are the sum total of our choices. We are who we have become because of the choices that we make. Good choices, bad choices, important ones, silly ones, they add up to who we are. So what's my favorite right? My favorite right is the right to make choices, because the right to make choices makes all of our other rights worth something. And to use a clinical phrase at you, and I'm sorry for doing this, I usually try not to do buzzwords, but I'm going to use one. It's called self-determination. Maybe you've heard of it. When you hear me say self-determination, I want you to think about making choices, because we've got all these studies that say that what self-determination is having control over your life, doing things instead of having things done to you, being the causal agent, the one that does things instead of having things done to them, that makes choices instead of having makes choices for them. So when people are self-determined, they're exercising their right to make choices. That's the ultimate part of self-determination. Well, here's something that we know. From decades of studies, going back to the 80s, there have been studies looking at the quality of life of people with disabilities, specifically people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And here's what they have found year after year and study after study, that for people with disabilities, those that have more self-determination, remember, those that make more choices have better lives in measurable and demonstrable ways. People with disabilities who have more self-determination, who exercise their right to make choices, are more likely to be healthier, happier, more independent, more likely to be employed, and safer. So now that we know that, another question for you, another potentially silly question is, are your rights worth anything if you're not allowed to use them? And I do mean that. If I tell you that you have rights in theory, but not in practice, are they worth anything? If I say, sure, you have the freedom of speech, but you're only going to talk when I tell you to talk, and you're only going to say what I tell you to say, is that a right? If I tell you that you have the right to vote, but only for who I tell you to, is that a right? Is that a freedom? If I tell you that the life you live, the liberty you practice, the happiness you have is my choice and not yours, are those basic freedoms worth anything? Of course they're not. Without choice, our rights don't matter. But that's exactly what we have done to people with disabilities for about 1,500 years. See, for as long as we've had laws, and here's a quick confession, you're going to figure this out about me anyway. I'm a giant legal geek. All right, I'm a lawyer. I am a legal geek. So here's what I can tell you. In the Western legal tradition, which is where we got the majority of our laws from, the Western legal tradition, what the very first time all the laws were put together in a book was during the Roman Empire. About 1,500 years ago, there was an emperor named Justinian who got all of the governors from all of the Roman provinces together, got all their laws together with the idea of putting them in one place, to harmonize them, to make sure that there was one law for the empire. That was 1,500 years ago, the Justinian Code. I have a copy. I am such a geek, I named one of my sons Justin. And here's what the Justinian Code says in one section. If you are feeble-minded, and that was their word for people with disabilities, you had to have a curator put over you to make decisions for you, someone else to do things for you. And what I've always said is that that created a culture or an expectation 1,500 years ago that follows us to this day, an expectation that any kind of limitation for people with disabilities necessarily meant they had to have someone to do the things for them rather than help them. And that's followed us. In Great Britain, where we actually did get most of our laws in the Middle Ages, they updated the Justinian Code. What they said is if you are an idiot or a lunatic, and that was their phrase for people with disabilities, you had to have a committee over you to make decisions for you. Now, that's followed us all the way to today in our American laws. We just call it guardianship. Now, guardianships work the same way pretty much in every state. Every state has its own guardianship law. Ohio has its own guardianship law. I'm going to show it to you later. But all the laws basically work the same way. If, for example, a judge decides that I can't make some or all decisions in my life, what that judge is supposed to do is take away the rights that I truly can't use and give them to someone else to do for me. Things that I really can't do, someone else should do for me. That someone else becomes my guardian, empowered to do the things that I really can't do. And if guardianship worked that way, you'd have no bigger fan than me. Here's the problem, though, because it's something we know from decades of studies, is that no matter what the laws say about having to figure out what people truly can't do, the vast majority of guardianships, over 90%, are what we call full or plenary. They take away all of the rights of the person and give them to the guardian, whether or not the person can exercise them, whether or not the person wants to lose them, hell, whether or not the guardian wants them. Judges say it's just easier to check all the boxes than figure out which ones to check. That's almost a direct quote from a judge. What one scholar said, as long as the law allows this kind of guardianship, it's going to be the default because it's easier. So whether or not I need someone to exercise all my rights for me, that's what's likely to happen 90% of the time in a guardianship. And in fact, that's exactly what happens in Ohio. What Ohio's law says is unless the judge limits the guardian, unless the judge says these are the things that a person is empowered to do, these are the rights that Jonathan truly cannot exercise and that Jonathan's guardian gets, it's assumed the guardian gets all of them. And I do mean all of them. Look at the second one on your screen. These are the powers a guardian can be given unless it's limited. And I'm looking at that: medical, health, other care, treatment, counsel, services. In other words, everything about that person's life can be given to a third party, often a stranger, to take the rights, to exercise the rights, whether or not I truly can do that. And that's dangerous. Look, if a full or plenary guardianship is what a person needs, and there are many people who do need them, there's nothing wrong with that. But if there are people who can exercise some of their rights or all of their rights, and those rights are taken away, that's a very dangerous thing. That's not just me talking, that's experts up on your screen, where guardians can have incredible power over people's lives, going into the most basic areas of people's lives, what they do, where they live, how they live, what kind of medical care they get, whether they get medical care. And that can be dangerous, because just like we know that having self-determination is a good thing. And remember, we've got all of those studies that say that self-determination is the key to a better life for people with disabilities. We know that the opposite is true, that when people lose self-determination, when they lose their right to make choices, their lives can get way worse. We have had studies on this going back to the 70s, where the first study I know about said that when you take away the self-determination of people with disabilities, they feel helpless, hopeless, and self-critical. The rest of that sentence, they won't behave, quote unquote, because they see no point in behaving. Now, that's not rocket science, is it? If I was to tell you over and over and over again that you can't do something, you're not allowed to do something, are you feeling particularly motivated to try? Of course not. There's even a name for that in psychology called learned helplessness, where when people are told they can't do something, they view it as a personal failure, and they are afraid to try new things because they're afraid of failing at that too. That's the second study on your screen. When people lose their self-determination, their self-esteem gets worse. They become more passive. They become less able to function. So I never tell people that guardianship is a bad thing. Sometimes, in fact, it is a very good thing. My sister is the guardian of my godson, and thank God for it, because she's there to do the things for him that he can't. But if she were also taking away things he can do, that can be dangerous, because that loss of self-determination is directly related to loss of quality of life from study after study after study. And that is something that we've known for decades. The quote up on your screen is from an investigation from Congress. This quote up on your screen, Congress did the very first investigation into guardianship in 1989. So interest in guardianship did not start with Free Britney. Okay. In 1989, Congress, the House Committee on Aging, did the first investigation into guardianships. They looked at guardianship laws, talked to guardians, talked to people under guardianship, reviewed records, talked to doctors, etc. And what you're looking at on your screen is one of the very first paragraphs of their findings. Take a look at the bold words. They're pretty scary. The typical ward, person under guardianship, has fewer rights than a typical convicted felon. When you have guardians, especially overbroad and undue guardianships, which is what I call those guardianships that take away rights people don't need to lose, or take away more rights than people need to lose. When you have those, what happens is you get a third party, a guardian, sometimes a stranger, who has the power to decide where and how a person lives, sometimes whether they get medical care, sometimes when they die. Like Congress found that a guardianship like that, an overbroad or undue guardianship, remember, not one that's needed, but one that takes away more rights than should be taken away, is the most punitive civil penalty that can be levied against an American citizen. The rest of that sentence, short of the death penalty. So where can we go from here? I made you a promise. I'm going to keep my promise. I am not here to say there should never be guardianships. I'm not here to say that. Of course, there are times guardianship is a very good thing. When a person is so disabled that he or she can't be part of decision-making, guardian is absolutely needed. When a person has disabilities and does not want to make decisions and is putting him or herself at risk, of course, guardian is a good solution. If there's an emergency, someone's life's at stake, someone's health is at stake, and there's no one around to help, guardianship is a great option, especially if it's temporary until the person gets what he or she needs. So I'm not here to say there should never be guardianships. What I am here to say is there should never, ever be guardianships just because you have a certain diagnosis, or just because you need help, or the two on the bottom of your screen that frankly turn my stomach because I hear them so often. Number one, because that's the way we've always done things. And number two, because it's for your own good. And for your own good is the one I hear the most. I have to get guardianship over my son or my daughter, my mother, my brother, my father, my sister, whoever, because it's for their own good, to protect them. They need this for their own good. And, you know, again, I don't question family members. I don't question friends. I don't question people who have someone's best interest at heart, because they're just trying to protect. But when you bust out the for your own good sentence, and you don't understand that we've got 40 to 50 years of studies that say taking away self-determination can hurt people, that's when things get dangerous. Because what happens is, from Justinian until today, we've had this expectation, this culture, that it's our only option, that it is in fact for our own good, that limitation equals necessity. And, you know, like I said, I don't question their motivations, because I know they mean well. Yes, there are horror stories, I might get into them later, about abusive guardianships. There are very bad people out there who try to take advantage. There are bad people who abuse or neglect people they have responsibility for. But I got to tell you, 98.9% or a whole ton of people who are seeking guardianship mean well. They're a family member, a friend, someone who cares, and they mean well. They want to protect. But there's a quote up on your screen that's almost 100 years old from the US Supreme Court that really sends the message, I think, that when we mean the most well, we have to be the most careful. You see, meaning well can blind us to the consequences. Like the Supreme Court said, the greatest dangers to liberty are the insidious encroachment by people of zeal who mean well but don't understand the difficulties, don't know the consequences, don't know the science. So when we mean well, when we think this is our only option, I have to recommend guardianship for my student, I have to get guardianship for my son or my daughter, and we don't think about other options and the dangers that come with losing self-determination, very bad things can happen. Because again, I hear it time after time after time. I have to do this. It's for their own good. And when I hear it, I do ask people to look in a mirror, okay? Because for your own good often means otherwise they might make a bad decision. They might do something they shouldn't do, sign something they shouldn't sign, buy something they shouldn't buy, have a relationship they shouldn't have. Bad things can happen, and my guardianship is going to protect them from that. The first thing I always say is really think about it and think if that's true. Guardianship is not a suit of armor. You're not going to be able to keep someone from ever meeting someone. It is certainly not a chastity belt. I always say, if you think about it, you can put Rapunzel up in the tower with everything she ever needs to be safe and away from all of the dangers, and she's gonna get out. If there's young people watching this, that's also the plot of the Disney movie Tangled rather than Rapunzel, but I'm an oldster. I think about it as Rapunzel. They always get out, and people are going to find situations. So we can't protect them 100%, but we also have to think about the basis of that question. Protecting people from making ever a bad decision, from signing something they shouldn't sign or meeting someone they shouldn't meet. And I ask you to look in a mirror and think about your life. And think about whether you've ever closed on a mortgage or signed a lease or signed a contract. I have closed on a mortgage a bunch of times. I've refinanced my mortgage, and mortgages always go the same way, whether they're in person now or over Zoom or whatever. It's a big meeting where there's a bunch of people there, a buyer, a seller, a lawyer, a paralegal, an agent, a buyer's agent if you're lucky. But what's definitely there is a stack of papers, real or virtual, about way up to the ceiling, right? Paper after paper after paper, where you are handed those papers one at a time, real or virtual, and said, sign here, sign here, sign here. And I ask people, are you like me? Did you sign that without reading it first? Because if you are like me, what you did was you put 30 years of your life and hundreds of thousands of dollars of your money into the hands of a bank that you don't know if it's under indictment or not, and without reading the fine print. That is a horrible decision financially. Don't you need a guardian to protect you from making that kind of a horrible decision? And then I ask people, have you ever consented to a medical procedure like surgery? I have. I remember when I got my knee done about 7-8 years ago. Still, because I'm a baby when it comes to medical care also. I remember getting wheeled into the surgery center with my heart going 1,000 miles an hour, just praying for Valium. And what I got instead of Valium were people getting in my face, person after person after person who I'd never met before, speaking jargon. I'm your doctor, I'm your nurse, I'm your anesthesiologist, talking all kinds of stuff and putting papers right in front of me saying, sign here. Then I ask, were you like me? Did you sign without reading them first? Because if you did, if you were like me, you put your life in the hands of strangers. It's a good chance you limited or waived your right to sue. That is a terrible decision. Don't you need a guardian to take care of your health care because you made that horrible decision? You know, we're sitting here, it's November 2022. We're hopefully, I hope, coming out of almost 3 years of pandemic, but I'll bet you during the pandemic, you all played one of my favorite games, my favorite pandemic coping mechanism and game. And it goes like this: have a bunch of drinks and go on Amazon and see what shows up the next day, right? If you've done that, and I know some of you have, you can know what kind of day or night you had by what shows up from Prime in the next couple of days. You know that you were stress eating if some useless piece of exercise equipment shows up, or you know that you were stress eating when a food making equipment shows up. Those are terrible decisions. You bought things you shouldn't have bought. You spent money you shouldn't have bought. Don't you need a guardian to protect your money? Then I ask people again, have you ever had a bad relationship and it taught you what a good one is? My God, sometimes in order to have a good relationship, you have to have had your heart broken in that bad one. Have you ever been a rescue buddy or needed a rescue buddy? Have you ever woken up in the morning and gone, wow, that was quite a night. I am never doing that again. Glad I did, because it gave you those things that we talked about. Remember, think about our cliches about the night before. That was a learning experience. That was a teachable moment. Those are the things, those mistakes that teach us, right? So all those mistakes that you made, signing things you shouldn't have signed, meeting people you shouldn't have met, relationships you shouldn't have had, things you shouldn't have purchased, nights out you shouldn't have done. Do they mean that you need guardians? Or do they mean that you made mistakes and you are better, smarter, stronger people because of it? Remember that Jean-Paul Sartre quote I started with? I am my choices. He was wrong. You're not your choices. You are your bad choices. You are the sum total of the mistakes you've made, because those are the ones that teach us who we are and who we want to be, who we don't want to be, what we want to do, and what our limitations are. So what I say to people is that when they say, I have to get guardianship for my son, my brother, my mother, my father, whoever's own good, aren't we saying that they shouldn't have the same opportunities to grow that we had, that they shouldn't be able to become the smarter, independent, stronger adults that we are because we made mistakes? And here's another example I'm going to give you is like this. If you think back only one generation ago to 1995, okay, to 1995, think about if you can remember 1995. Again, I know that the more I do these presentations, the younger the audience gets, the more people weren't born in 95. So if you were not born in 1995, on behalf of everyone else in this audience, we don't like you very much because we remember 1995 and you couldn't possibly have not been born then. But okay, people who remember 1995 for people with disabilities, I want you to think about this. 1995 was only 5 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. That means in 1995, people with disabilities had just been recognized as having equal rights. It was 4 years before the United States Supreme Court said that people with disabilities have a full and equal right to live in the community. What that means is that in 1995, it was perfectly legal to say to a person with disabilities, you will live in an institution. I don't care what you're able to do, what your doctor says, what your abilities are, you will live in an institution. That was okay. In 1995, placing a person in a sheltered workshop, which is a segregated setting for people with disabilities only, where they make less than minimum wage, was not only legal, it was considered to be a favorable outcome. Schools and agencies would brag about the number of people that were placed in sheltered workshops. In 1995, we didn't have supports and services like we now. We didn't have technology like we have now. We didn't have programs like we have now. So now turn the clock forward 27 years only to 2022 and think about what life is like now. Like I told you, it is now a legal right for people with disabilities to live in the community. It is an expectation that people with disabilities will work making regular wages in regular workplaces. Someday, I'm hoping to say it's a right. Right now, we have supports and services and things that we can do that are way different than 27 years ago. I mean, think about your phones. I hope you're not looking at your phones now, but think about what your phones are for. Think about what you do with your phones and realize that we do so much more with our phones than talk. We do other things on our phones other than talk, way more than we talk on them. Think about what this phone can be as a connection device. With this phone, I can have a telemedicine appointment. I can see my doctor can see me, and I can conference in someone if I want someone there with me to help the doctor understand me and me understand the doctor. With my phone, I can access my bank account, I can balance my checking account, I can check what's going in and out, and I can budget. And I can give someone else access, if I want, to help me with my budget, to help me advise me on my money, make sure I'm not overspending. With my phone, I can make appointments. I can set medication refills. I can shop for different types of drugstores now, based on what is the best price and what has the best options for me to refill me when I'm needed. With my phone, I can set up supports and services. I'll give you an example. I work with a person who has a traumatic brain injury and diabetes. Okay. She is exactly the type of person who would be in an institution in 1995 because of her TBI, she sometimes does not pay enough attention to her blood sugar levels. So she's had a couple of crashes. So she'd be in an institution in 95. Well, where she is now is home because she has a free app. She has an app that connects her glucose monitor to her phone. When her blood sugar gets too low, it sends her a text, eat something. When it gets lower, it texts her mother, her sister, and her doctor so they can get in touch with her and help her and remind her to manage her blood sugar. In other words, because she has a free app, she's living independently, whereas she would not have been able to do that. That is the amazing things about our phones. That's how far we have come in 27 years. I mean, think about it. Sitting here in 2022, don't we have more ways to make more people more independent than ever? And if that's so, why, as it says on your screen, have the number of people in guardianship tripled since 1995? Since 1995, we have gone from an estimated 500,000 adults in guardianship to an estimated 1.5 million adults under guardianship. Statistically speaking, 95% chance they've lost all of their rights too. Remember, that's the vast majority of guardianships. And some of you might be thinking, yeah, it's because we're all getting older. Every morning, I know we're getting older, but that's not true. Actually, the fastest growing segment of the population going into guardianship, according to the National Council on Disability, are young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds, 58% of whom, 18 to 24-year-olds with intellectual developmental disabilities, are in some form of guardianship right now. You're more likely to be in guardianship if you're a young adult with an intellectual developmental disability than if you are a 75 or 85-year-old. That is an entire generation that is at risk of losing their rights for the rest of their life. Why? Because we mean well. Because someone meant well. They wanted to protect. They wanted to help. And that's why I say I never question motivations to want to help, but I do talk about the dangers of taking away options and rights and self-determination, because the science is scary. What we know is that people who are in guardianships they don't need, those overbroad and undue guardianships, they can experience a significant negative impact on their lives. They feel less well. Their physical and mental health is worse. In some cases, they live less long. They function less well. The other side of that is that we know from study after study after study that people who have more rights and more self-determination have a better quality of life. They're more independent. They're more likely to be parts of their community. You know, the number one reason I hear for guardianship is safety. I hear it all the time. And again, I never question motivations. I have two children. My first obligation is to protect them, to keep them from being hurt. So I get it. When someone says, I want to protect my mother, my brother, my sister, my family from being abused or neglected, you're never going to hear me say that's the wrong idea. But what I do talk about is science. There's a series of studies that were done by a professor named Dr. Kempka in New York. And she did a series of studies on the relationship between self-determination and safety. One of them is on your screen right now. In this particular study, Dr. Kempka worked with women with intellectual disabilities. Now, if you don't know this, you should. Women with ID are significantly more likely to be abused or neglected than any other segment of the population, more likely to be physically and emotionally and sexually abused. It is awful, and they are more likely to experience that abuse. So what Dr. Kempka did was work with that population, with a group of women with IDD, and she did a classic study. She divided them up. Now understand this entire group had similar abilities and limitations. I'm not a scientist. I call it an apples to apples study. The people she was working with all had similar abilities and limitations. So she divided them up, classic study. That group over there was called the control group. And to them, she said, go live your lives. This group over here was called the experimental group. To the experimental group, she gave access to a curriculum, a recognized curriculum designed to enhance self-determination, to teach improving decision-making skills, to teach knowledge of and ways to make decisions. And when that was done, she brought the groups back together and gave them a test, a recognized test designed to measure how well they recognize and avoid abusive situations. Guess what they found? Apples to apples, remember. The ones with more self-determination were better able to recognize and avoid abuse. They were safer. And again, that's not rocket science, is it? If you know it's your body, your life, your choice, aren't you going to fight like hell when someone tries to take it away? If you know something is yours, aren't you going to be more likely to protect it? And that's what I've told judges and people across this country. If you want to keep people safe, don't assume you do that by taking away rights. Enhance abilities, enhance knowledge so that people know that someone just can't take what's theirs. And that's how you make people safer. And here's another example, a cherry on top of the sundae, if you will. My favorite study, I warned you I was a geek. It's called the National Core Indicators Study. This is a study done in almost every state, including Ohio. And what the National Core Indicators Study looked at was the quality of life of people with intellectual and developmental disability, and looked at things that impacted quality of life. So the whole point of the National Core Indicators Study was to look at what impacts variables had on people's quality of life. One of the things they looked at, just one, was whether or not people had a guardian. Now, what I should tell you is the National Core Indicator Study, again, was an apples to apples study. They compared people of similar abilities and limitations to others of similar abilities and limitations. They even used the old words, mild, moderate, and severe. So they compared people with mild disabilities to people with mild disabilities, moderate to moderate, severe, severe. And what they found in Ohio and across the country was this: people who did not have a guardian were more likely to work, live independently, have friends other than people who are paid to their family, socialize and date in the community, and practice the religion of their choice than people of similar abilities and limitations who did have guardians. It was such a thing, they did it again a couple of years later, and they found the same thing. Apples to apples. People who do not have guardians were more likely to live where they wanted to live, make choices about their lives, be parts of their community, be respected, work, date, marry, than people of similar abilities and limitations who did have guardians. So what I ask you to think about, whether you are a teacher, a practitioner, a parent, or anything, is, isn't this exactly the kind of life that you want for the people you care about? You want your children, you want your students, you want the people you support, you want your patients and clients to live and work and date and do the things we all want to do. And if we know that the one thing that might be standing in between having these things and not having these things is having a guardian. Doesn't that mean that 1,500 years back to Justinian to today is enough? Don't we have to change that culture that says people with disabilities have to have guardians? If they need a guardian, they should have one, but we shouldn't assume it's our only option, because the taking away of the self-determination causes harm. When people don't need guardians and they have their rights taken away, they lose options. They lose the availability of the benefits you see on your screen right now. So if we can agree on all those things, then I have to ask a question: where do we go now? Okay, my whole point in this whole first part, the last 45 minutes, was all dedicated to hoping that you acknowledge that we all agree that self-determination is the key to quality of life for people with disabilities. The more self-determination you have, the better your life is. And the opposite, the less self-determination you have, the worse your life can be. If we agree on that, and I think the science says we have to agree on that, there's one more thing we have to agree on, and that's this. Self-determination is not saying you're on your own. It's not saying take care of yourself, you're on your own, go be self-determined. That's not what self-determination is. Because people with disabilities need some help. I mean, everybody needs help. You should have seen me just every time I try to get on a webinar, I always mess it up. I always have to ask Steve, can you see my screen? Did I share a screen properly? So I need help every day. But help is incredibly important to people with disabilities. Support is incredibly important to people with disabilities. So what I'm saying is this is what we need to agree on. That one, we need to find ways for the people in our families, in our lives, the people we teach, the people we support, to be as self-determined as they possibly can be, because that's the key to a good quality of life. While at the very same time, making sure that they have the support they need to exercise that self-determination effectively and safely. And if we can agree on that, we can move forward, because I got a story for you about it. Okay, this person you see up on your screen, her name is Jenny Hatch. Okay, Jenny Hatch, that's that person you see smiling at you. And when I met Jenny, which is amazingly 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, this is what I knew about her. Jenny was 29. Jenny was a high school graduate. Jenny had her own apartment, and even though she had Down syndrome, it was not a group home, it was not a special home, it was her own apartment with a roommate that by all accounts was kept spotlessly. Jenny had a job. She'd been working for 5 years, not a special job, not a supported job, a regular job, making regular wages, paying regular taxes. Jenny had a group of friends she liked to hang out with. She was politically active. She was a volunteer on multiple political campaigns. Jenny had a church that she went to every Sunday. Jenny, in other words, had a life just like yours and mine. And that's all she wanted, was to have her life. Jenny wanted a life like everyone else, and she had it. She went to work, she came home, she saw her friends, she took care of her home, she went to church, she had a life just like everyone else. Until one day she was riding her bike and got hit by a car. It was a car accident. It gave her a back injury. The accident had no impact, zero impact on her cognitive abilities. It caused no impact on her ability to think or reason or make decisions, okay? But that back injury did require surgery. And shortly after Jenny came out of the hospital, she found herself on the receiving end of a petition for guardianship filed by her mother and her stepfather. Her mother and stepfather asked the court to put her into guardianship. Jenny at 29 years old. At 29 years old, one day in August of 2012, Jenny walked into a courtroom. She walked into a tiny courtroom in Newport News, Virginia. And when she walked into that courtroom, she had all of her rights. She could do what she wanted, get what she wanted, live where she wanted, work where she wanted, volunteer where she wanted, go to church where she wanted. She had all her rights. In just 3 hours, she lost them all. Because when I met Jenny, and I met her in February of 2013, this is what Jenny had. Jenny had been placed in what was being called a temporary guardianship, but there was no end date on it. Instead of living in her own apartment or with friends where she wanted to live and was free to live, she was required to live in a group home, a segregated group home. It's a nice enough place. It was also behind barbed wire, and she did not want to live there. Instead of going back to her job where she wanted to go and she was welcome to return to, she was told she had to work at the sheltered workshop attached to her group home, where she worked basically full-time for 8 months and made about $1,000 total. Jenny's cell phone was taken away. Her Facebook password was changed. Her laptop was taken away. If you wanted to see or speak with Jenny, you had to fill out a permission slip, hand to God, a permission slip that you gave to the guardians to request to visit with her or speak with her. And on that permission slip, you had to say where you were going, what you were going to do, and when you were going to have her back. And you had to agree to the rules of visitation on the back of the form. Rule number 1, you were not allowed to talk to her about her guardianship because it upset her. Do you know why talking to her guardianship upset her? Because she did not want to be in guardianship. She said, I want to go live with my friends. She was told, get used to your new life. You live here. I want to go back to my job. Get used to your new life. You work here. I want to go to my church. Get used to your new life. We go to this other church. So yes, being in guardianship upset her. Now, when I tell this story, this is about the time when I'm doing it to a live audience. I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're reacting the same way my live audiences do. And you're saying this, no way. There is no way that's true. So what I did was I took this material and I put it online. Right now, you can go to jennyhatchjusticeproject.org, jennyhatchjusticeproject.org. There's a section of it called Jenny Hatch, a drop-down menu, the Justice for Jenny trial, and you can see material from that trial. One of the things you can see is the permission slip. The permission slip that says you're not allowed to talk to her about her guardianship. Well, I'm not really good at following rules like that. So when I was asked to go see her, I just kind of barged in. Okay, I'm from New York. I carry a briefcase. I talk quickly. You can pretty much get in anywhere. So I saw Jenny and I said to Jenny, I'd like to work with you. I would like to be your attorney. She had an attorney. I'd like to work with your attorney. I'd like to help you. They've asked me to be in. Can I help you? She said, yes. So I became Jenny's attorney. And one of the first things I did was I contacted the attorney for the guardians. And I said, I understand you think she needs a guardian. We think she doesn't. I understand there's a trial coming up. That's where we'll get it all done. But one question, this permission slip thing, does it apply to me? And I was told, yes, it does. And I said, wait a second. Are you saying that I can't talk to my client about her case? And that's the rules of the guardianship. So think about this for a second. Just think when you think about this particular guardianship and the dangers of overbroad and undue guardianship. If Jenny Hatch was, let's say, an axe murderer, and she was found holding an axe and holding a head and covered in human and saying, I did it, ha ha, ha 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 ha, I did it. You know what she'd have the right to do? Talk to a lawyer, right? But Jenny Hatch wasn't lucky enough to be an axe murderer. She was unlucky. Instead of being an axe murderer, she was a person with disabilities under guardianship. So apparently she didn't have the same rights as an axe murderer. So the very first time I had to go to court was to ask the judge to give her the same rights as an axe murderer, the same right to talk to a lawyer. And again, if you think I am exaggerating, jennyhatchjusticeproject.org, you'll see the motion I had to follow. You'll see the emails between me and the opposing counsel where I was told I had to do the permission slip thing, that I wasn't allowed to talk to her. We had to go to court, and it was not an easy thing. We had to write briefs. We had to write arguments where I just said, Judge, I just want to talk to my client about her case, and I just want to see her file. Well, thank God the judge agreed. I was allowed to see her file because I was thinking the same thing you are. Why the hell she needed guardianship? Especially given that the car accident caused no cognitive damage. Okay, why does a person who was working with her own apartment in her own life, why does she need a guardian? So I looked in the file, and the first thing I saw in the file was the order putting her into guardianship. I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing, lots of legal language, but this is part of it, and this is a scary part. Take a look at what this says. Guardians have the power to say and decide who she sees, what kind of support she gets, what kind of health care she gets, what kind of safety she gets, habilitation, services, education, treatment, and where she lives. Look at that. she have any rights left? In 3 hours, didn't she essentially lose all the rights that make Americans Americans? Why? Well, I kept reading. Turns out that at that 3-hour hearing, there was a star witness. There was a star witness who was a psychologist who, after Jenny had her back surgery, they sent a psychologist into the hospital to do an evaluation. They call it a capacity evaluation, to try to determine whether Jenny had the ability to make her own decisions, whether she would need a guardian. That's what the psychologist did. This person who'd never met Jenny before, seeing her in a place she'd never been before, asking her questions she'd never been asked before, and she did it while Jenny was on Percocet. But what you're seeing on your screen right now is her exact testimony at that 3-hour hearing. When she was asked about Jenny's ability to have independent living skills, bold words or direct quotes, she said if she had assistance, she may be able to do that. What about her ability to understand legal stuff? She would need assistance to understand a legal document. What about money? She would need assistance with a bank account. When she was asked what Jenny really needs, here's her quote. She's going to need assistance to make decisions about her healthcare and her living arrangement, things like that. She will need someone to guide her and give her assistance. When asked what Jenny really needed, that I believe what would be beneficial to Jenny is she be surrounded by people who love her and support her, who give her the assistance she needs. Well, okay. I kept reading. And I learned from reading the file that when Jenny turned 18, remember she's 29 here, when she turned 18, her mother and stepfather had her sign a power of attorney. And by power of attorney, I mean one of those ones that you get off the internet, like goes up to the ceiling. I'm a lawyer. I didn't understand some of the words in it. So we asked a question. We said, if you think that Jenny can't make decisions, how did she understand and sign this power of attorney? And frankly, we were expecting that they would say, well, we thought she could understand. We gave her a chance, but now we know better. That's not what they said at all. What they said, under oath, mind you, is on your screen right now. They said Jenny did understand what she signed. Why? Because she had an attorney explain it to her. That attorney got to know Jenny. That attorney let Jenny ask questions and went through the power of attorney and helped her understand and got to know her. And look at the bottom, based upon a series of observations over several visits, the attorney concluded, and we concurred, that Jenny was capable of understanding these documents. When we went to trial, they went even farther. They said they had a doctor who said with that assistance, Jenny could totally sign that power of attorney. So here's what I learned. I learned that that psychologist was right. Broken clocks, right? That psychologist was right. I talked to Jenny. I talked to her 2 days ago. I talk to her every week. And here's what I know about Jenny. She totally needs help with legal issues. It's one of the reasons I'm around. She totally needs help understanding medical issues, taking care of her health. She needs to understand balancing her budget and managing her money. She needs assistance pretty much every day. You know what that makes her? It makes her human. There is no one who is able to live their life, manage their money, manage their health, understand legal issues, do what they need to do without getting some kind of help at some point. If you're like me, it's a whole lot of help. So we are all, to some extent, Jenny has. There's just one difference, is that if you are not a person with disabilities, if you're what I call a temporarily able-bodied person, or a TAB, because every TAB is 1 second away, one slip, one fall, one accident, one heart attack, one diagnosis, one thing from having a disability. If you're a TAB, it's okay to need help. In fact, you're supposed to get help. You're not judged for that. You are complimented for that. But for people with disabilities, ever since Justinian, needing help, any kind of limitation, everyone assumes you can't do things. So that was our job. We had to go to court and we had to show the judge that there's no sin in getting help. In fact, getting help is good. We had to tell the judge about supported decision-making. And yes, I know I'm 33 slides in, just shy of an hour, and I'm finally getting to the point. We had to talk to that judge about supported decision-making. So what's supported decision-making? Look on your screen. There's a great quote up there. In fact, that's a quote that you will find in legal journals in textbooks and in books that's going to tell you all about supported decision-making. Supported decision-making is a recognized alternative to guardianships through which people with disabilities use friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so they may make their own decisions without the need for a guardian. I wrote that, and I think it's crap. So please do not think that this is supported decision-making. If you want to know what supported decision-making is, take away all of this pseudo-intellectual claptrap. Poor Dr. Blank, my boss, is stuck with this in front of his name for the rest of his life. If you want to know what supported decision-making is, just ask yourself a simple question. How do you make decisions? What do you do when you don't know what to do? When you have something that you've never faced before in your life or on the job, what do? You get help, right? You go to a friend for advice. You go to a coworker for information. You go to a doctor when the doctor speaks jargon. You say, can you please explain that to me in plain English? When you go to the mechanic and the mechanic speaks auto mechanic jargon, if you're lucky, you have a buddy like I do who knows about cars. You give him a call and you ask him for advice. You do research. When you do that, when you're getting the information and advice you need to understand your situation, you're using supported decision-making. That's all supported decision-making is. We do it every single day. I bet you each and every one of you can use an example, can come up with something where you got support to make a decision today. Here's the difference again. If you're a tab, if you're temporarily able-bodied, supported decision-making is a virtue. I mean, again, think about the cliches we use about supported decision-making. Get a second opinion. Don't make a snap judgment. Make an informed choice. Don't go off half-cocked. My dad's favorite saying was always, if you measure twice, you only have to cut once. They all mean the same thing. Get help. Get a second opinion. Get advice. Get support. Supported decision-making is something we're supposed to do. On the job, we are often evaluated by how well we work with others. So supported decision-making is a very, very good thing. It's so good, it's all ingrained in the way we do things that we don't even think about it. No one calls it supported decision-making. We just call it life, unless you're a person with disabilities. If you're Jenny Hatch and you say, I don't understand that, explain it to me, or I'm not sure what you're talking about. For 1,500 years, we've just assumed that people with disabilities can't do things, that they can't make the decision and they have to have a guardian make it for them. So our job was to show that to the judge, that Jenny had been using supported decision-making her entire life. Again, she didn't call it that. She just called it making decisions. We gave you that example of the power of attorney, right? How did Jenny understand it? Well, the lawyer explained it to her, just like the psychologist said Jenny would need. Assistance understanding a legal document. Jenny had done documents and signed them her whole life. Jenny had to have back surgery, remember? So we asked her mother and stepfather, if Jenny can't make decisions, how did she sign her consent to her back surgery? And they told a story about how Jenny didn't want to consent to it because she's scared of needles. But the doctor explained to her, got right down in front of her and talked to her and said, it's just one needle. I have to do this. And when you wake up, you won't be in pain. It'll be gone. And her father and stepfather talked about how they talked to Jenny separately and explained to her that they loved her, but this is something she had to do. And you know what? She understood and she signed it. Her case manager testified that Jenny signed her multi-page person-centered plan because they went through it line by line and page by page. And they would not go to the next page until they were sure that Jenny understood the last page. And she initialed every page when they were sure she understood it. And at the end, she signed it herself. And document after document and decision, we talked about that, right? We talked about all of the decisions Jenny had made. Well, here was the thing that we had, unfortunately, is we had a judge who was skeptical. We had a judge who was probably thinking the same thing that a lot of you are thinking. And again, it's okay to be skeptical. That judge had real concerns about Jenny's decision-making. That judge started by asking the psychologist we put on, well, you know, how do you know that Jenny's never going to make a mistake if you give her this right, because you can't know. You can't know. Mistakes are something that happened to all of us. But what I can say is that based on science and based on my evaluation of Jenny, that she will make decisions better when she has the support she's always used. When we put on a legal expert, the judge said, well, couldn't we just start in the guardianship, and then little by little she could earn her way out? And they said that's not the way rights work. All of us are guaranteed rights, and that based on science, taking away her self-determination is actually going to set her back. And when we put on a Medicaid expert to say that Jenny was going to have access to essentially 24/7 care when she needed it, so if there was any concerns about her making a bad decision on her safety, that wasn't something to worry about, the judge said, what's on your screen? He said, my grandmother said in a perfect world, things might be perfect, but it's not a perfect world. So how can we know? How can we know what's going to happen? And God bless our Medicaid person. She said, you can't know, but what you can know to the best of your ability is what's there. And I said to the judge said to me, if we keep her in guardianship, I know that I'll always be there. And if there's ever something that she needs, you can come back to me. And finally, and this is what either bothered the judge or won him over, I said, Judge, and I had my Medicaid person list 7 or 8 different agencies that if Jenny was in any danger, could open an investigation within 48 hours. And I said to the judge, can I get in front of you in 48 hours notice? And he just scowled at me, and he knew, because the perfect world that he was talking to my Medicaid person about was the one that he was talking about, where he'd always be there, or that people could earn their way out, or that they'd never make a mistake. That's not the world we live in. We don't live in a world where we judge people's right to make decisions by whether they only make good decisions. None of us can meet that standard. So finally, after 6 days of trial, we finally get down to what I'm sure you'll know is my favorite part of every trial, closing argument. Okay, Italian boy from New York. Closing argument means I get to do every Al Pacino imitation I've ever wanted to do. And I did, man. I paced around that courtroom. I pounded the table. I preached for like 45 minutes about why she didn't need a guardian. She was doing supported decision-making. You don't have to take away her rights. And the judge said, I'll be back in 15 minutes with my ruling. And he was gone for an hour. And that hour, let me say to Jenny, we're going to lose. Because I was sure we were going to lose. Because before I ever got involved in Jenny's case, that judge was quoted as saying that he had a nephew with the same condition as Jenny, and he would want his nephew protected. And all the questions that the judge asked told us that he was probably going to keep her in guardianship. So I told her, we're getting ready, and I already had things lined up for the appeal. I did not expect to win this case in Newport News, Virginia. I expected to be in an appellate court. Anyway, judge gets back up on the stand. You can read his order, Jenny Hatch Justice Project. And when you do, you'll see that the first like 4 or 5 pages are all about why she needs a guardian. So put my hand on Jenny's shoulder. I did what lawyers are trained to do. I told her, stay strong. We're going to fight this. And then Jenny said, like she said before we went, every day before we went to court, Jenny would say, he's going to send me home today. And she said, he's sending me home. And then the judge said, however, it's like page 5 of the order. She was reading it. He said, however, he told Jenny that he didn't think that she was ready to make all her own decisions. So he was going to keep her in guardianship for 2 types of decisions only: health decisions and safety decisions. So every other decision is back to you. You have the right to make those decisions. Okay, that's a start. Then he said, the guardians are not going to be your parents. They're not going to be the parents. See, I did not tell you about Jim and Kelly. Jim Talbert and Kelly Morris were Jenny's employers and friends. Jenny had worked for them for 5 years. When Jenny had to come out of the hospital after her back surgery, she couldn't go back to her apartment. She needed rehabilitation and treatment and OT and PT and a specialized bed. And her parents would not take her in. I have no problem saying that. It's in the court record. Her parents would not take her in. So who took her in? Her employers, Jim and Kelly. And when the guardianship process started, Jim and Kelly hired their own attorney. Before I ever heard the name Jenny Hatch, they had their own attorney on the case. I think they dropped something like $50,000 on this own attorney to make one argument. She doesn't need a guardian, but if she has to have one, let it be us, because we'll support her to make her own decisions. So the judge said the guardian's going to be Mr. Talbert and Miss Morris. Then the judge says the guardianship's going to end in 1 year. And it did. That guardianship terminated in August of 2014. So Jenny has been living without a guardian for 8 years. And let me tell you, she's doing just fine. And then the judge said something no judge in America had ever said, that a guardian's job is not to make decisions instead of a person. It is to make decisions with the person, to use supported decision-making. It's the first time a trial judge ever said that in the United States, to say that people have the right to make decisions and guardians make decisions with them. And then the judge said a couple more things. He said, write to the guardians, write to Jim and Kelly. He said, I want you to get her home today. And I want you to get her back to work if she wants on Monday. So that day, August of 2013, almost a year to the day, when Jenny walked into this tiny courtroom and walked out with 0 rights, she got to walk out like this. That's the front page of the Washington Post that day, that Jenny got to go home. And this is why this is one of my favorite pictures ever. Look at her face. See, Jenny had been told to get used to her new life, and she wouldn't. Remember I told you about learned helplessness? She never gave up. She never got it. Jenny fought every day, and she got her rights back, and she got to go home. And isn't that a great story? Isn't the Justice for Jenny case a great story? Well, let me tell you, if it's just a great story, I wasted your time. And in fact, I'm wasting your time this whole day if it's just about a good story. It's not about a story. Because when you see Jenny got justice, you got to ask why. There's more to this story. You have to ask why Jenny got to get her rights back. Because without that, the story is meaningless. It's just one person. So you've got to ask why her. And I'll tell you why her. It's not just because she's awesome. It's not because she's an angel. It's not because she's inspirational. It's because she had a ton of help. She had friends and professionals who went to bat for her. Again, Jim and Kelly spent all that money on their own attorney. She had national organizations and leaders. The guy who's now my boss flew down from Syracuse, New York, to testify in that courtroom for almost nothing. There were people who were filing briefs and saying, this young woman is the one who can do this. The media loved her. Can you imagine why? And they named this. There was a reporter who heard about this case before I ever did, who named it the Justice for Jenny trial. And finally, there was a judge, Judge Pugh, who listened and learned, who went from talking about conditions and protection to supported decision-making. You know what that means? That means she got lucky. That means she got lucky. And that's the moral of this story. That's why I told it. We have to say to ourselves that our lives, our rights, our self-determination, our freedom cannot rely on luck. Here's the deal about Jenny. I will guarantee you there are hundreds of thousands of people who are quote unquote higher functioning than her, much as I hate that phrase, who are in guardianship right now. She just got lucky. Take away Jim and Kelly, take away the judge, take away the media, and she is right back in that group home with no rights, as she puts it, snapping snaps together 8 hours a day and being bored. That's why I told you that story. So where can we go in Ohio? What you're seeing on your screen right now is Ohio's law. This is the law in the state of Ohio. What it says is you cannot be placed in a guardianship unless you're incompetent. That's the phrase used in the law. If you are incompetent, you can be put into guardianship. So when are you incompetent? Look at the bold word on your screen. You are only incompetent if you are incapable of taking care of yourself or your property. If you are incapable of managing your life, that's when you're incompetent. Well, here's the thing about being capable. How do you know when a person is capable? I mean, you know this already deep down, okay? You know the answer to this question. Whether or not you are capable is not a yes or no question. It's not a black or white issue, because sitting here today, right now, there are things that you are capable of doing with no help. Just things you're good at. There are things that you need a little help to do. In fact, there are certain days when you're more capable than others, right? Ever wake up in the morning and go, man, I'm not feeling like I can get anything done today. I'm not capable of handling this today. There are days when you need more help. And there are some things that you 100% need help to do that you would not be able to do unless you had help. So your capability changes day to day, hour to hour, activity to activity. Here's the best example for you. If you are not a doctor or a medical professional, you are not capable of taking care of your health because you can't diagnose yourself, you can't prescribe medication. That doesn't mean you can't take care of your health. It means you need help. It means you go to the doctor. Again, I told you, I'm a baby when it comes to healthcare. When I go to the doctor, I don't feel well. I kiss the doctor's ring. I say, please make me feel better. Doctor prescribes medication. I take it. Perfectly capable of swallowing a pill. I have no idea what's in that pill. I can't even spell azithromycin. I don't know the difference between azithromycin and erythromycin. What I know is the person in the white coat who I trust said, take this pill. And because of it, I took care of my health. In other words, because I had help, I'm capable. Without that help, I would not have been capable. So capability, whether you are capable or not, is not a black or white question. It's not a black or white yes or no issue. Being capable depends upon how you're doing that day and what kind of help you've got that day. So when I tell people, when they're thinking about whether or not guardianship is right, I always ask them two questions. Number one, if you are only able to take care of yourself or your life or manage your life when you have help, are you incapable? And if the answer to that is yes, then we're all incapable, because none of us can take care of our lives and property 100% without help. So it can't be, it's the question of whether you can do it all by yourself, because nobody can. That's number one. And that means the most important question of all, what else have you tried? Before seeking a guardianship, before recommending a guardianship, before saying there's no choice but guardianship, what have you tried to help this person maybe be capable, become capable? What help has been offered to help that person exercise their capability? And if the answer is we haven't tried anything, then about 98% of the time, I would say try something. Yes, of course, a person in a coma needs a guardian. They're incapable. Yes, of course, there are people whose disabilities are so severe that there are things they can't do. I get it. But 98% of the time, I would say, what have you tried? And I would beg judges, and I beg judges across the country, ask that question. What else have you tried? And that's just not my position. That's the position of the National Guardianship Association. The National Guardianship Association is an organization made up of guardians, by guardians, for guardians. Their website is guardianship.org. They train guardians, certify guardians, created a code of ethics for guardians. There is no one more invested in guardianship than the National Guardianship Association. This is what they say. Before guardianship, try something else. Try supported decision-making. It might work. It might not work. If it doesn't work, guardianship's probably appropriate. But why are we rushing into, why are we still doing the Justinian method of assuming that people have to have guardians? Because here's the thing that supported decision-making can do. Think about what it does for you. Think about the ways that you use supported decision-making now that you know it has a title. SDM, supported decision-making, when you go to your friends, when you go to your professionals, when you go to the people in your life, they help you figure out what your options are. They help you do pros and cons list about what options are best. They help you focus to see the forest for the trees so that you can make the best decisions, that you understand the options before you so you can make your best decision. That's what supported decision-making does for you. Helps you clarify the issues, helps you figure out your options, helps you weigh the pros and cons of your options, and eventually helps you make the decision about which option is best. That's what supported decision-making can do for people with disabilities. They might need more help. They might need different kinds of help, but the concept is exactly the same. The point is to empower people to understand their choices, figure out what their choices are, weigh their options, and pick their best choice. And here's the good news. I know you're thinking, get to the point, hippie. How do we do it? What is the book? What is the app? What's step one? What's step two? What's step three? Here's the good news, and you already know this too. There is no book, no app, no one size fits all. And I say that as a person who has written not one, but 2 books on the subject. I have never said, I will never say that there's only one way to use supported decision-making. If someday someone tries to sell you on supported decision-making, that there is one magic form, one magic method that works for everyone, run away, because you know better. You know that you make decisions differently than me. You know that you need different kinds of help at different times than I do. So of course there's no one size fits all. Some people just need informal support, someone to talk to, an ear to talk to, a shoulder to lean on, and that's all they need. Other people are like me. I have what I call go-to people in my life. There are people I go to for specific things. When one of my kids is having trouble in school, days that end in Y, I have a sister who's an educational professional. I am going to New York tomorrow to help my mom move into her new apartment. My mom is getting older. I have another sister who is a specialist in older adult services and supports. We have been leaning on her to work with my mom to find out the best place for her to live. When I have difficulty with my car, I told you I have a buddy I talk to first. I have go-to people, and people with disabilities can make use of go-to people as well. They can put that in things like powers of attorney and supported decision-making agreements, which we're going to talk about in the second part of this process. Some people like even more formal methods. We call them circles of support or micro boards, kind of like a personal board of directors or a personal IEP team. We meet regularly, live or Zoom. We talk about issues. I get their advice. We have discussions. I have input so I can figure out and do what's best. Well, all of these things are supported decision-making because all of them involve me going to you for advice and assistance so I can understand my issues and I can make a decision. That's what supported decision-making is. In fact, I always say there's only 3 things we have to do supported decision-making. I call them the 3 commandments of supported decision-making. You do these 3 things, you're doing supported decision-making. They're all easy, by the way. Step 1, we all agree that everyone has the right to make choices to the maximum of our abilities. That's the Declaration of Independence, right? We hold those truths to be self-evident. We have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We have the right to make choices. Step 2, I can ask you for help with a choice without you assuming I can't make choices. And that's easy because we do that every day. Every day we ask for advice or support or assistance. We're asking someone to help us with our right to make choices. And we're not expecting them to go, oh, you need help, so you can't do it, you need a guardian. And last, we realize that there are as many ways to give and get help as there are people. The first thing you try to empower someone might not work. Don't give up. Have you never gone to plan B in your life? Of course you have. Plan D, plan F, plan Q. We try again. There's many tools in the box until you find what works for the person. And something might work or nothing might work. And if nothing works, nothing wrong with guardianship. But what's the rush? The rights at stake, the rights that are important to you, the rights that make us who we are too important to give away without trying something else first. Because just where I started, and the reason I spent all that time on self-determination earlier, and self-determination being the key to a better life, is that we are getting studies now that show that when people use supported decision-making, they have more self-determination. And for the umpteenth time, that's not rocket science. If I'm using supported decision-making to make my own decisions, instead of someone making decisions for me, then I have more control over my life. I am making more choices. Of course, I'm more self-determined. And we've got all those studies that say self-determination equals a better quality of life. We just did a study in Virginia on this. We just did a study on this where we worked with a series of young adults, in their 20s and early 30s to help empower, and some in the teens actually, to empower them to use supported decision-making. These were people across the spectrum of abilities, some across the spectrum of intellectual developmental disabilities. They all had different living situations. What we did was we taught them and their supporters and their family members about supported decision-making. We gave them information about it. We gave them materials and said, go make a plan. Not going to tell you how to do it, not going to tell you what to do. Go make a plan the same way we all do and let me know what it is. And they came back and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to exercise our supported decision-making. And then we followed them for about a year. We did regular interviews, regular check-ins, saw how things were going. We did formal interviews of them and their supporters and their family. And here's what we found when the study was over. Every single one of them across the board that was using supported decision-making was more independent, was more confident, were better at making decisions. And according to the people in their lives, were making better decisions. And even in the middle of the pandemic, the majority had joined more groups and were doing more things with their life. Why? Because they were more self-determined. They were more involved in their life. They were making more choices. And that is the key to a better life for people with disabilities. And in Ohio, that's built in to the system. You don't have a law that uses the words supported decision-making, but you don't need it. What your law does say is that before a person can be put into guardianship, there should be evidence of a less restrictive alternative. The court should consider whether there are less restrictive alternatives. And if there is one, like supported decision-making, the court should not put the person into guardianship. So that question I asked, what else have you tried? The court is supposed to ask. If you're thinking about guardianship, you should ask. The person who is subject to the guardianship should be asking, what else has anyone tried? What else is there? And that's so important because guardianship has been seen as a life sentence. You know, the law says that if you're in, there's actually, you can ask to be let out. We're going to show you that later. But traditionally, guardianship is viewed as almost impossible to get out of. And you can know that because of the phraseology we use, the words we use. The phrase for getting out of guardianship was always restoration of competency. You have been restored. You are no longer incapable. You have been restored. Well, what does restored sound like? It sounds like cured, doesn't it? Well, people with intellectual disabilities, people with disabilities, mental illness, physical disabilities, they're generally not curable because it's part of them. A person with Down syndrome like Jenny Hatch is not going to be cured of Down syndrome. So if we are looking at getting out of guardianship as a life sentence, or getting out is impossible because guardianship is a life sentence, there's no way to be able to get your rights respected or back unless you're able to be cured. Except that's not true. Again, here's your law. When a person goes into guardianship in Ohio, the guardian's job is to make decisions that are in the best interests of the person under guardianship. That means, what are you doing? What are you trying? If you're the guardian, there's nothing wrong with being a guardian. The question is, what are you doing? What are you doing in that person's best interests? Well, here's what we know from all those studies. What's in people's best interest is being more self-determined, is having more control over your life, because we know it leads people to being healthier and more independent and more likely to be employed and safer. So that's in their best interest. So what are we trying to help people be more self-determined? Because here's the thing, there is a way out. If a person under guardianship has improved, has developed the need, has developed capacity, is now able to manage his or her life, well, then you can go right back to that court and say, this person no longer needs a guardianship. This person the guardianship is no longer necessary because the person has developed supported decision-making abilities. The person has developed a way to manage his or her life. So I always say this, guardianship should not be a life sentence. It's a way station sometimes. I'm sure there are people out there who are 18 years old with disabilities who are not ready to manage their lives. Were any of us ready to manage our lives at 18? I know I wasn't. But let's assume for a second, people with disabilities might not be ready to be adults at 18. Well, wouldn't it be great if we looked at guardianship as a way station, a time for a guardian to do their job, to do things in the person's best interest, to build self-determination, to help the person develop the supports they need to manage their lives, to have the capability of managing their lives, and then going right back to that court and saying, good news, judge, I did my job. You can fire me. And when that happens, amazing things happen. When we look at guardianship that way, amazing things happen. These are all people who were in guardianships. They had no legal rights. And because their families, their friends supported them, they now have all their rights back. Ryan King was the first person in Washington, D.C. to get out of a guardianship because of supported decision-making. His parents, who were next to him, never wanted to be his guardians. They were told they had no choice, they had to be. Well, when the Jenny Hatch case happens, they said, wait a second, this is what we do. This is how we work with Ryan to make decisions. So they found me, and we put together a power of attorney and put together a support system and showed the judge he was using supported decision-making, didn't need a guardianship. And that's him coming out of courtroom with his rights back. This is Tanya, who had an accident, got a traumatic brain injury, and went into a coma. And her mother on the left did the right thing by becoming her guardian. Well, when Tanya started getting her abilities back, she wanted her rights back. And she and her mom got into arguments about her rights and about her abilities. And they went to court, they were spending money. And the judge from Ryan's case appointed me as the independent expert, I always put that in quotes, to talk to the parties. And it turned out they wanted the same thing. Tanya and her mom wanted the same thing. Tanya wanted her rights back. Her mom wanted her to be independent. Tanya wanted help when she needed it. Her mom wanted to be able to help when she could. They created a power of attorney with supported decision-making. And after months and months of fighting, that's how they walked out of her court when Tanya got her rights back. Takora was living in a car. Takora was living in a car because her guardian was in another state and had lost touch with her. And Takora wasn't able to sign a lease for an apartment under the law because she had no rights to sign. Well, it turned out her attorney on the left and I worked together and found out that Takora had lots of options and lots of support. She had support systems to help her refill her medication and make appointments. She had job training opportunities and friends who were able to refer her for apartments and supports and services. So that's Takora coming out of court, the first person whose diagnosis was mental illness to get out of a guardianship because of supported decision-making. Marie, who after 3 years, I have never been in the same place in the same time with, was living in California. Her father was her guardian, called conservator in California. And her father wanted to move to Michigan and wanted to force Marie to move. Marie didn't want to move. Marie's friends and her family and her work were in California. So Marie put together a supported decision-making team with her aunt who's next to her, her family, her friends, and created a supported decision-making team and fought the guardianship and said, if dad wants to move, he can move. I want to stay here. They shouldn't be able to force me to move when I want to live here. And sure enough, there's Marie in California after court when her father was removed as her conservator so that she could work with her supported decision-making team. And finally, Scott's in Wyoming. Scott's mom, who's on his left, got guardianship over Scott because she was told there was no choice. She said she heard me speak and told me that she wanted to give Scott a present for his 35th birthday. She wanted to give him his rights back. So she worked with Melissa, who's on the right, to go to court in Wyoming to say, Scott can use supported decision-making. We made a supported decision-making plan. And this is them in court that day, walking out with Scott with his rights back. So that's what supported decision-making can do. And it's only been 9 years, remember, since Jenny. Jenny's decision was August of 2013. And in just 9 years, 16 states have passed new laws recognizing supported decision-making, and DC. So 17 jurisdictions have completely changed their laws. There are projects in Ohio and across the United States on supported decision-making. There is the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making, supporteddecisionmaking.org, that provides information and resources on supported decision-making to people, all because supported decision-making is seen as a way to help people have a better life and have access to their rights. Here's the deal. I know that some of you are thinking, and I get this question a lot, so I want to address this. You're thinking, is this safe? You're thinking, the question I get, Jonathan, I get it. I believe in rights. I believe in independence. But how can I be sure if I don't get guardianship that my son, my daughter, my brother, whoever is going to be safe? Can you promise me nothing bad will happen? I say, of course not. Of course not. Nothing is 100% safe. But again, look in a mirror. We cannot condition decision-making and rights on only making good decisions and only exercising rights in a good, safe, smart way, because we all make mistakes. None of us can meet the Mr. Spock standard of only making logical decisions at all times. And by the way, there's never been a study that finds that guardianship is always safe. There's horrible stories of guardianship abuse. So what I'm saying is nothing is 100% safe. But given that, if I'm given a choice, the one I at least try first is supported decision-making, because based on Dr. Kempka's studies, self-determination is related to safety. So I'm going to try the one that builds self-determination. If it doesn't work, guardianship's always there. So that's what I mean. And I think I can end this first part of our presentation with a quote from the judge in Scott's case, where those same questions were asked about safety. And what the judge says this: you can't guarantee that Scott will always make the correct decision. No one can meet that standard. That's true with everything in life. Every decision that people make, we all make mistakes. And he said, Scott, I know you're going to make mistakes, but you're going to learn from them. And he dismissed the guardianship, the first judge in Wyoming to do that. Why? Because we found a way forward. We found a way to empower Scott, just like we empowered Jenny, just like we empowered Ryan, just like we empowered Tanya and Takora, and people across the country are recognizing that meets the values we all have. Every single person on this call, all 31 of you, believe in independence. I hear parents across the country say, I want 3 things for my children: to be happy and safe and independent. Well, we can work on those things because self-determination is related to all of them. So the things that we've talked about, I admit, are things you already know. But now you know there is a way to make your values a reality without removing rights. And that's the end of our first part of the session. I know I've been talking for an hour and a half. Why don't we, Steve, if it's okay with you, take about a 10, 15-minute break and we can come back and start part 2.
Yeah, we can go ahead and take a 15-minute break if that works. So if everyone wants to come back at 2:20.
Fantastic. I'll see you all at 2:20. The next session is going to be about how we can take the things we talked about and put it into practice, how we can form supported decision-making, explore it, and how we can fit it into the supports and services we work on every day. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at 2:20. Thanks.
It's all yours, Jonathan.
Thank you all so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. I always joke that it's the #1 compliment any speaker can get when you have the opportunity to escape and still choose to come back to hear more. So thank you for that. So like I said, this part 2 of our presentation today is all about going from theory to practice. To say, I just hopefully convinced you why supported decision-making is a good or intriguing thing. Let's spend some time talking about how. So that's the things to focus on now, is the hows. And really what it all comes down to, I said when we began that supported decision-making is the greatest advance for people with disabilities since the Americans with Disabilities Act. Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act really gives us our focal point for this entire concept and presentation. It goes like this. The ADA says in its very first section that people with disabilities have a right to fully participate in all aspects of society. And that's what this section is about. Ways to use supported decision-making to get us there, to build the self-determination, build the skills, build the opportunities to be full and equal members of society and fully and equally take part. As we've shown, that people who have more self-determination have better quality of life. As we've seen, supported decision-making is a means to get to self-determination, because when we use supported decision-making, when we're getting the help we need, when we need it to make the choices we need to make, what we're doing is we're building and exercising our right to make choices. And as the science has shown, as we correlate the use of supported decision-making with more self-determination, we see the benefits to quality of life for people who use supported decision-making. That Virginia study showing that people who use supported decision-making were better at making decisions, made better decisions, and had a better quality of life. Like I said, only 9 years since Jenny's case, and we've had so much action. 17 states, 16 states in DC passing laws, entities and agencies like the American Bar Association, the National Guardianship Association, the Department of Health and Human Services, all endorsing and supporting the enhanced use of supported decision-making. So now that we know it's a good thing, how do we get there? What are some tools that you can use? What are some steps that you can take to empower people to use supported decision-making? Please remember what I said. No matter what book you read, no matter who talks to you, whether it's my book or anyone else's, there is no one way to do this. The things I am talking about are general guidelines for you to apply to the specific lives, strengths, and needs of people. The first one is done by the American Bar Association called the Practical Guide. Practical is an acronym for the things that you see on your screen, which we're going to go over. But each of the letters of practical represents a step in trying to empower people to make their own decision and avoid guardianship unless it's truly needed. So looking at practical, each letter, the P stands for presume. We start by assuming that guardianship is not needed. That's the opposite of what we've been doing since Justinian for 1,500 years. For 1,500 years, we have assumed that people need guardianship, that limitation equals inability. Well, practical step one, presume that we don't need it. Just because a person has a diagnosis, a disability, or a need, it doesn't mean they need to lose their rights. It might just mean that we need to find a way to empower them. What it means is that guardianship should be the last resort. And that's exactly not only what the National Guardianship Association says, it's what Ohio's law says. Ohio's law says, like we saw before, that if there is a less restrictive alternative, a person shouldn't go into guardianship. So we shouldn't go in assuming that guardianship is needed. We should go in looking for what that less restrictive alternative should be. Number two, what are the reasons why we think a guardianship might be needed in the first place? Okay, the reasons is the R. What are we seeing the problem is? Okay, what is it the person isn't able to do that we think they might need a guardian to do for them? So identify the limitation. Is it this person's having difficulty managing their money? This person has health issues. This person makes poor choices. This person needs help. Identify those reasons. Those reasons don't mean the person has to have a guardian, but those reasons are what the person needs help with. If we were presuming guardianship is needed, what would the guardian be doing for the person? So what does the person need that they don't have now? Step three, when you know the reasons, ask a question. Ask A, is there a way to address this without guardianship? Okay, remember, in Ohio, a person only gets a guardian if they're incompetent, right? If they're incapable of taking care of their self or their property. So in the ask step, we ask if there are things we can do other than a guardianship to help them be capable. The example I have on your screen is, can we use technology? Remember, we talked about all of the things our phones can do. So are there ways, if a person's having issues with taking their meds or meeting their medical needs, are there a way that we can use tech to have scheduled medication refills and deliveries? Can we set reminders to take medication? If it's access to the doctor, can we do telemedicine? Can we, if it's a financial issue, can we have a supporter be on the money to work with the person and help the person advise? So that's just what technology can do. Can we go low tech? Could this be the kind of thing where just a supporter would help out with? That's the point of ask. If there are reasons why the person needs help, the reasons why we think guardianship might be appropriate, we should be asking if there are ways to meet that need other than a guardianship. Takes us to step 4 is, if we come up with some reasons, if there are some things the person needs, we know there's a problem, and then we ask and we kind of list out ideally how those things could be solved, we go to C, community. Are there resources that can help meet the needs from reasons by providing the supports we looked at in the ask? And there are lots of community resources. We're going to talk about several of them in this presentation, and I'm going to go into lots of detail about them when I come to Ohio in the spring. But there are many community resources. We're going to talk about things you can get through special education, through vocational rehabilitation, through the OOD agency, through centers for independent living and Medicaid waivers. There are lots of potential supports out there that are low to no cost. We should be exploring that to see if that's something that we can access for the person. What are the reasons why we think the person needs help? Ask what kind of help the person needs, and look to the community to whether there are ways to get that help. Next is T. Does this person have people in their lives? Does this person have a team? Okay, all of us, so many of us, I say, I have go-to people in my life. I can talk about my team. Does this person have a team? Are there friends? Are there family members? Are there professionals this person already has in his or her life that can help provide the supports they need along with any community resources? If not, maybe we can help the person identify a team. So if they already have people in their lives, and there have been cases I've worked with, that Takora case, the person who was living in their car, she had a team. She had friends and professionals who were already in place. But there are others, the American Bar Association calls some people unbefriended, who don't have people in their lives. Well, there we help them identify people who could be. They could be professionals who work with them, like direct support professionals. They could be case managers. We can find people who are in their peer groups. In Mississippi, retired lawyers sometimes act as supporters, or retirees through local agencies sometimes volunteer to act as supporters for people coming out of nursing homes so that they have someone in their lives. So we identify people who can be on the team to work with any community supports to provide what they need to address the reasons why we think they might need guardianship. Are there any problem members of the team? Challenging members? Sometimes we see people on a team who might not have the best motivation in mind for the person. We don't want to think about that, but sometimes there are bad apples. We have to root out challenges. If I'm advising a person and I see that there's someone taking advantage of the person I'm advising, I talk to the person about maybe minimizing that person's exposure in their life, maybe not giving them access to money or healthcare. Or worse, if I think there is a true and real danger from that person, you can go take legal action. There are agencies out there you can address: Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services. There's always the police. There are orders of protection. There are injunctions. So there are things that we can do to address challenges, people on a team who may be bad actors. It's that person, if they've got team members, they may have someone in mind who they want to have more power in their life. We're going to talk about powers of attorney, but powers of attorney are very good things. I have one with my wife, which says, if God forbid something happens to me and I can't make decisions, I want her to do it. She's the person I want to take charge if I'm not able to do so. I gave you the example of Tanya, who came out of her coma and she wanted her mom there and her mom wanted to help. They did a power of attorney. So sometimes the person has someone in mind who they want to appoint to say, I've got a person in my life who, if something happens to me, I want them taking charge. I want this team member to be given additional authority through a power of attorney or an advance directive or as a representative payee for benefits. And we can do that as a way, as an alternative to guardianship, someone the person chooses voluntarily. Because when you voluntarily appoint someone, as I'm going to show you when we talk about powers of attorney, we can not only say they're going to have this authority, we can say how they exercise it. We can create a supported decision-making plan in that way that says, I am appointing this person to do this thing at this time. And just like that, instead of a guardian being put over me, there is someone who I know, I trust, and I work with who's going to do things the way I want them to. And in the end, if none of that works, there is nothing wrong with guardianship, but limit it to just where the person needs it. Remember, the vast majority of guardianships take away all rights. And when that's needed, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it's not needed, if guardianship truly is needed, and it often is, we should limit it to only those areas where the person truly cannot make decisions. So that is the practical model. It basically runs in a straight line. Start by presuming the person doesn't need a guardian. Find out what the problem is. Ask what the ideal solution to it would be. Find community resources that may be able to provide the supports and services that will solve the problem. Create a team the person may already have. Bring that team together to say who is going to do what and when. With no team, help the person identify one. Root out any challenges, any conflicts, any abuse or neglect. If the person wants it, appoint one or more people to do things. And if nothing works, your last resort, guardianship's fine, but limit it to just the area where the person needs it. That's a pretty good pathway you can follow to bring supported decision-making into practice. Here's another one that I did in an article called Steps in Supported Decision-Making. And I always say again and again and again, there's no one way to do this. These are general guidelines. But really, the first step in supported decision-making is figuring out where the person wants help, kind of that ask area. If a person may need additional help or recognizes they may need help, step one's always going to be figuring out what help the person wants, where the person wants to be helped. There's a great resource for that. There's a link on your screen. I'm going to send this slide deck to Steve, and Steve, you are free to distribute this to anyone who wants it. Okay, but there's a resource called the Missouri Stoplight Tool. It's not the only resource, it's one that I happen to like. What the Missouri Stoplight Tool is a way to identify where people want help. It is a series of questions. There's a section of it on your screen. See, instead of just using an IQ or a diagnosis to say that a person definitely needs help or a person definitely needs something, we're going to look at this person's life, look at this person's needs. And the Stoplight Tool goes through a bunch of real life situations, and it asks questions about the person's life. Can this person make and communicate choices about employment? Can this person understand what they need for their health care? Can this person manage their medication? And you got three choices. Person doesn't need any help or is good to go with the supports they have now. That's a green light. A person may need more supports to make this happen. That's a yellow light. And a person can't do it, or it can't do it at least now. And that's a red light. And what we're doing when we do the Stoplight Tool, both with the person and with people in the person's life, is we're going to get a good idea of where help's needed. If we got a bunch of green lights for these questions, we know those are areas where the person's okay. If the person says it and people in the person's life says it, I call that triangulating, they're probably okay there. But the more yellows and reds we see, these are areas to focus on where additional supports might be needed. You might need guardianship. You should at least consider what else might be needed. So right away, we're getting rid of that idea that a person who needs help needs it everywhere. We are figuring out specifically what and where the person wants help. Because when we've done that, once we've identified where the person wants help, the next step is figuring out what kind of help the person wants. Because here's the deal. The vast majority of people are using or have used supported decision-making already. We discussed that. We're all getting advice at some point. We're all seeking out help at some point. So what the next step is figure out what kind of help the person wants. If we start by asking where you want help, the obvious next step is, well, when we're talking about that area where you're getting help, what kind of help do you want? And there's a tool for this one, again, link, called the Supported Decision-Making Brainstorming Guide. What this tool is designed to do is have an interactive conversation with the person where we try to figure out when they've used supported decision-making before, whether it worked out, or whether there are other ways they might want to be supported. If something has worked before, it kind of makes sense to try it again. If it worked well in one way, maybe it'll work well in another. You're kind of exploring, is this person a picture person? Do I like to have things in front of me? Do I like to have things explained orally? Do I like pros and cons list? So we can figure out the method that works best. And the supported decision-making brainstorming tool is a section of it on your screen. Again, gives you an opportunity to say, how does this person do it already? How have they done it before? How can we work together based on that to do it again? It's designed to be done with the person and people in the person's life. So we can develop, again, from the person's input and from the person's potential supporters' input, how we're going to put it into place. So if I've got a few yellows, like I said, around, let's just say medication management, knowing to take my medication, getting to the doctor, etc., we can set up a system for how this person might like to be supported to make it happen. What are the steps and supports that we can do to bring this together? So once we know where the person wants help and what kind of help the person wants, the next question is who? Who out there can provide these supports that we're looking at? And like I said, like in the community step in practical, this is considering what supports and services and organizations might be able to help. And we're going to talk about ways to bring in the special education system and vocational rehabilitation and Medicaid services in Ohio that can provide funded supports and systems, but also who are the people currently in my life or who could be in my life that can provide the type of help I want when I want to be helped. So once we know when I want help, what kind of help I want, and who can help, the next step is bringing it together, is setting up a plan for when I'm going to need the help, what kind of help I get, and who's going to provide it. My favorite resource for this is one called Setting the Wheels in Motion. There's a link up on your screen. Again, I'm forwarding this to Steve for distribution. What the Setting the Wheels in Motion guide was done, it was written by a friend of mine who is an advocate in California and has 3 children with disabilities. What we used to call severe and profound disabilities. And the Setting the Wheels in Motion guide is the first part about her story, how she discovered supported decision-making, how she works with it with her children, how she has incorporated supported decision-making systems in the lives of her children. But the really cool part of the guide is the second part, where there are resource and worksheets. Again, kind of a guided conversation to help with the steps of figuring out how it's all going to fit together. Here is just one part of the guide, and this one is about kind of setting goals for the team. where we're talking about what do we need, how's it going to be, what supports and services are in place now, what do we want to do to put things in place for the person. There are multiple worksheets on this that talk about bringing it together, setting up meetings, how we're going to measure success, so you can organize the steps in a way that works best for the person. I mean, looking at your screen, no one person is going to have the same financial, medical, housing, employment needs and wants and opportunities. This is a chance to explore each person's specific needs and how each team can meet them with each of their respective abilities. That's the beautiful thing about a team, is that each member of a team brings different things to the table. Again, just looking at my particular supported decision-making team, my sister, the educational expert, my sister, the aging expert. I have buddies who know finance and buddies who know cars. Each of them brings a different perspective to the table. So I might ask two of them the same kind of question and get two completely different perspectives. That's a good thing. It helps me understand my options. So when we're setting the goals for a team, that's what we can do too. Figuring out who they are, what they bring to the table, and listing what we want from them and what we want to accomplish. And the last step is, when you have a plan, I recommend putting it in writing. I don't think we should be required. It's actually kind of a controversy in the supported decision-making world about whether an agreement is something you have to have. I don't believe it is, simply because I don't have a supported decision-making agreement, and I'm not sure that people with disabilities should have an obligation to do something I don't. But I think it's incredibly helpful because we're listing out those things that we just went through: where I want help, what kind of help I want, who I want it from, and when it's going to happen. That's a great thing to have in writing, because then we can follow up, we can amend it, we can check and see how it's going. And to be very honest, people like stuff. You know, if I'm going to the doctor, doctors want to see something in writing. It's helpful to have it. So I do believe making a written plan is helpful. There are examples of written supported decision-making agreements all over. You can Google it. supporteddecisionmaking.org, the National Resource Center, has a bunch, and you can do it formally or you can do it informally. There is a way just to make a roster. Remember I told you about Marie in California, Marie, whose father wanted to force her to move. Well, Marie's supported decision-making plan is a handwritten sketch of the people in her lives and what she wants them to do. We eventually typed it up. It's not an agreement. It's not a contract. It says, Jonathan will help with legal issues. Suzanne will help advocate with this entity. You know, it just lists who we are and what we do. And Marie says, this is what I want you to do. And we say, okay, that's an agreement. It doesn't have to be something like a contract. It could just be a plan, or my personal favorite, this one. This is one of the people in Virginia who I worked with. Remember I said, go and come back with a plan? Well, this is what she came back with her supporters. She came back pleased as you could be, dropped it in front of me and says, this says who I want to help me, when I want them to help me, and what they want me to help me with. And that's it. And I said, that is it. That's perfectly it. That's what supported decision-making is. It's saying, I need Aunt Philly's advice with figuring out what activities to do. It says, on my healthcare, I want Allison to help me so I can understand what I need. I love this as a supported decision-making plan because it's something we can follow and put together, and it was important to her. So those are our steps in supported decision-making, and they're really simple. They're common sense, isn't it? Figure out where I want help. Missouri Stoplight Tool is great for that. Figure out what kind of help I want. Brainstorming guide is good for that. Figure out who can help me. Figure out how we're going to put it all together, and then put it in writing if you can, if you want to. That's a supported decision-making plan and a way to do it. And there are so many opportunities to use supported decision-making. That's why I said when we started, it's not about guardianship or not guardianship. I get really concerned when supported decision-making is just looked at as a binary choice between guardianship and supported decision-making, because that really reduces opportunities and is frankly scary. I've been saying forever, if you go to a parent whose child with a disability is just turning 18, and you say to that parent, okay, parent, you got two choices. You can do guardianship, which is something you've heard about, something you've been recommended to do, and something that's been around for 1,500 years, or you can try this supported decision-making thing that you've never heard about, it's all new, and you don't know how it works. Of course they're going to seek guardianship because it's what they know. But supported decision-making is more than that. It is a way to engage in decision-making all through life. So the rest of this session, we're going to be talking about specific ways and in specific programs that we can use supported decision-making. We can make it happen. And obviously, the one that's most important to everyone here is going to be special education. So I'm going to spend a little more time on special education. And again, I say I'm coming out to your area, I believe in the spring. We'll go into way more detail on how to make this happen. But just as an overview, I want to start by saying, again, this is another one of those areas where we have years of studies, going back to the 90s, actually. We know that just like we know that self-determination is the key to quality of life for people with disabilities, we know that self-determination is the key to success for students with disabilities. Study after study from 90s until last year was the last published one I saw, has found this. Students who have more self-determination transition more effectively. They do better in school. They do better outside of school. They are more successful as an adult. After they leave school, they are more likely to be going to college or further education, more likely to work, and more likely to live independently. I want to stress that again. Self-determination means for students that they are more likely to be further educated, more likely to be employed, and more likely to live independently. That's what self-determination does for students. That's important because the whole point of special education is that. That's not Jonathan talking, that's the law talking. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the law that creates, funds, and regulates special education, this is its very first section. It says the point, the purpose of special education is to prepare students, in the bold words at the bottom, prepare students for further future education, employment, and independent living. Special education is there to prepare students for future education, employment, and independent living. And what do we know that is directly correlated to that? Self-determination. We know that students who are more self-determined are more likely to be educated, employed, and live independently in the future. That means, as study after study and paper after paper has said, the point, the goal of special education is to help students be more self-determined. We see it time and again in U.S. Department of Education and other sponsored studies. Promoting self-determination is a best practice. Schools should be focusing on improving students' self-determination skills, setting goals, solving problems, and most importantly, making decisions. These are the key to self-determination in the school setting. But there's a problem. There is a problem that is frightening, and it risks us going backwards. I mean, here's the thing. Before IDEA, and that's not that long ago. IDEA is from 1973. I know it seems like forever ago, but it's only 49 years. It is only 2 generations. So 2 generations ago, students with disabilities had no rights. That meant that 1 in 5 were getting any education. 80% of students with disabilities got no education rights. And that meant they couldn't progress. All of those things that we see for more self-determination and more skills were impossible to reach for students with disabilities because they had no opportunity to get and recognize and build those skills. Well, it's different now. Now, self-determination, as we see, is not only an expectation, it's written into the law. The very things that self-determination creates, enhances, are written into the law. We have an obligation to propagate more education, employment, independent living opportunities. We have an obligation to build student self-determination. But the problem is that according to studies, including one I did, the number one referral source for guardianship are schools. We did a study where we asked guardians across the country, what was their first prompt for guardianship? When did you first hear about it? When were you first recommended to seek guardianship? Frankly, expecting that the answer was going to be lawyers, but the answer, number one with a bullet, was school personnel. A teacher, a counselor, an advisor. Someone said that you have to get guardianship. You have to get guardianship if you want to come to an IEP meeting. You have to get guardianship if you want to be involved in the student's education after they turned 18. And the problem is it's created what the National Council on Disability calls the school to guardianship pipeline, where, as we saw in that study, 58% of students of young adults 18 to 24 with IDD were in guardianship, with the number one referral source for that being schools. And I'm not saying that schools are evil or they want to take away rights. This is well-meaning teachers and educators who are using what I call institutional knowledge. Someone told someone, and they heard this is what they have to do. And very often this comes, and parents may know this, or teachers may have had an experience in this, with what's called transfer of rights. Under IDEA, one of the things that a school has to do when a student in special education is turning 17 is send a letter to the parents that says your student's turning 17. When your student turns 18, he or she becomes a legal adult and has the right to make decisions for him or herself. Now, I always wondered about why that's in the special education law, because nobody told my mom that I was turning 18 and was becoming a legal adult. But that's what schools have an obligation to do, is tell parents that your child will be a legal adult at 18 in 1 year. The problem is that often leads people to say, and therefore you have to get guardianship if you want to continue to be involved in the IEP process. And I tell parents and teachers, they know that's not true, because the very top of every IEP meeting form I've ever seen says you can bring whoever you want. So yes, your child at 18 may be a legal adult, but they have the right to bring you. They have the right to bring whoever they want to their IEP meeting. So no parent is shut out of the IEP process when their child turns 18. The problem with that continuing logical fallacy is the school to guardianship pipeline, where parents are hearing that guardianship is their only option and, frankly, an obligation. And lots of parents are seeking guardianship who would not otherwise have done so. So in order to what I call shutting down the pipeline, we should be focusing, just like the law says, just like IDEA says, we should be focusing on self-determination and supported decision-making as early as possible. We'll go into this in more detail in the spring, but I believe that every single goal can and should have an application of self-determination to get there. We can make educational goals that build supported decision-making and build self-determination without ever using those words. And here's how we do it. I will guarantee that many of you have seen what I call boring goals, boring IEP goals, the ones that come out of, boilerplate language, things that say like, the student shall use proper grammar 75% of the time. And I always say, with a goal like that, who cares? Number one, it's really hard to use proper grammar 75% of the time. Number two, if I don't use proper grammar, what happens? I fail. I'm not taught anything. I don't build anything. It is a black or white, yes or no question. No self-determination is built. No decision-making skills are created. I'm not moving me toward further education, employment, independent living. So what the U.S. Department of Education talks about, what I've talked about, are what I call I statements. new ways to write goals that are student focused, that require self-determination and supported decision-making and make them matter. I'll give you an example. Rather than the student will use proper grammar 75% of the time, I will work with my teacher to choose subjects I'm interested in and write stories using proper grammar at least 3 out of every 4 times. Now that is a 100% good goal. It is specific as to its subject matter. It is measurable. 3 out of 4 times, writing stories, subject matter. But look what it does. I will work with my teacher. I need to work with someone to choose subjects. I will get support to figure out what I want to do, and I am going to be interested in it, and I will write stories. This does not use the words self-determination or supported decision-making, but it's all about it. In order to make this goal work, I need to have support and I need to be self-determined. And if I don't make it work, I don't fail. I need to work with my teacher differently. One of my favorites is about, I always use the example of instead of the student will reduce the number of times he is tardy by 50%, which again, pass or fail, and what am I learning? I will work with my parents, teacher, aide, whoever, to develop a plan that makes sure I am on time for school 50% of the time or more. I will work with people, support. I will make a plan, self-determination. If it doesn't work, I need to make a better plan. I need to be more determined. And I'm building skills rather than just having a yes or no equation as part of my goals. And we can make that for any type of goal. Rather than memorize your multiplication table, you can make a budget. I will work with my teacher to develop a budget where I increase the amount of money that goes in each month, and I set priorities for spending without overspending my budget. That's just doing math, but it's about a thing that is interesting and requires the student and teacher to work together to develop a situation. And we do that, we develop these goals, we set them up at an IEP meeting. Well, again, I hear horror stories from IEP meetings, how parents and kids feel like they're just surrounded and they're being talked at instead of talking with. Well, there is a way to make the IEP meeting an exercise in supported decision-making. In fact, the student-led IEP is considered a best practice nationally. And the student-led IEP is what it sounds like. The student takes a leadership role in the IEP meeting from day one. I tell parents, if you're listening to me, I don't care how old your kid is, get your kid to the IEP meeting. If it's for 3 seconds, that's fine. Make sure your kid knows that's his or her team, and that kid should be involved from as early as possible. Because as the student gets older, the student should be taking more responsibility with the team. A 3-year-old can generally say his or her name. A 5-year-old could say what he likes to do. A 7-year-old could say his favorite subject. And as they get older, they do different things. They might introduce people at the meeting. They might be responsible for reading the agenda. They might be responsible for talking about what they do well and what they want to do better for the present level of performance. The idea is the student progresses as the student gets older, taking on more responsibility, with the goal of when the student turns 18, the student is actually leading the meeting. It's his or her meeting, and they work together, the team and the student, where the team is supporting the student and the student is working with the team. They are discussing back and forth. They are writing proposed goals. So at the end of the day, the team works like a team. They support the student, and the student says, yes, I agree with this, and signs off on the IEP. Team supports, student decides. That's just supported decision-making. That's just a way to practice and build self-determination and supported decision-making skills in a safe environment. And here's why we know it works. Science. We know that students who lead their IEP meetings are more self-confident, they're better able to advocate for themselves, they interact more positively with adults, they're more responsible, and they're better at seeking resources to address their limitations. For every parent out there, isn't that exactly the type of adult you want your child to be? To every teacher out there, every administrator, every practitioner, isn't this exactly what you want for students you work with? Well, if we know that building self-determination is a key to achieving the aims and the obligations of the IDEA. And you can do that through having a student lead an IEP meeting. Shouldn't we be putting the student-led IEP into practice right away? Shouldn't we be working to set up systems that the student is responsible for? I like to tell students, you got responsibilities. You don't have to have rights. You have to do things. You have to lead your team. You have to go out and do these things. It's not just stuff you get. It's not a one-way street. We put obligations and responsibilities on students because there are benefits to doing that too. And we can do that also as we're looking for ways to how can we build self-determination? How can we set these goals up? What are the best goals and best supports and services for the student? To realize that any parent, any school can request an evaluation of anything. Teachers can recommend evaluations of any topic as long as it is a subject that is designed to address educational needs. Well, we already know that independent living and further education and further employment are educational needs because they're written in to IDEA. So a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, as required by special education, involves independent living and self-determination. So with that, you have a right to request an evaluation. Teachers, you have an obligation to recommend evaluations. And here's a very simple one you can do. Here's a good resource. It's called imdetermined.org. It is a project in Virginia, the Virginia Department of Education. And imdetermined.org has lots of resources. But one of the things I really like is self-determination checklists. And they're normed to different student levels. There are self-determination checklists for grammar school, middle school, high school, etc. And the whole idea is to figure out where the student's self-determination level is and where they might need help with. And what it is we have checklists that ask people to rate on a scale of 1 to 3 how the student does certain things. And what's on your screen is an example of a checklist for a teacher, I believe, for high school, where you're asking, does the student set goals? How well does the student make plans? How well does the student do in his IEP meetings? Does the student, make good choices? And we rate on a scale of 1 to 3, or 0 to 3, actually. And the more lower scores we have, the zeros, the ones, are telling us where we need work to do better, where the self-determination skills might be lacking, and what we should address. So with something as simple as that it doesn't require a big outside expert to come in. This is a great first step. I've got schools asking me all the time, well, what do I do in this evaluation? Well, have you looked into I'm Determined? Because this is a great first step where we can just get the same way we did with the Missouri stoplight tool. We can do this with an educator, a student, and a parent to see how we can triangulate where the abilities are and where the needs are. And just like that, we can figure out where help is needed. And that's a huge deal, because when we are addressing self-determination issues, we are helping the student. It shouldn't be surprising, but there's studies on it showing this, that when we create goals designed to enhance self-determination, students become more self-determined. But more importantly is the impact they have. Self-determination-based goals result in better performance in school and better performance on out-of-school activities. They are better in school, at home, and in the community. Why? Because they're more self-determined. And what do we know about self-determination? It is the key to better quality of life. So as we are meeting our obligations as a school for education, employment, independent living, which is directly correlated to self-determination, as parents who are advocating for students, it's an opportunity to build goals specifically focused on self-determination. Why? Because they work. Why should a student lead an IEP team? Because it works. These are things that make the student's performance better. Okay, so we've been talking about guardianship all along, right? What does this have to do with it? What does this have to do with guardianship? What does the student-led IEP have to do with guardianship? How do we bring this back to full circle? Well, we can make it back full circle by talking about Jenny. Remember the psychologist who saw Jenny and was asked what would be best for Jenny? She said what Jenny would be beneficial for Jenny is to be surrounded by people who support her and care for her and give her the assistance she needs. And doesn't that sound like a student-led IEP? It's so funny. It actually is the definition of supported decision-making. That psychologist had never heard of supported decision-making. But at Jenny's trial, I showed this definition. I showed this quote to a legal expert on supported decision-making. And he said, oh my God, she even used the word support and assistance. I'm going to use this in my next book, he said. That's what a student-led IEP is. If you think about it, it's what an IEP team should be. They should be working with the student in the lead to provide the student with assistance and opportunities so that the student can lead to the maximum extent possible, learn to and make decisions as he or she gets older. And that is consistent with educational best practices. Like I told you in the very beginning, the things I talk about are not hippie, trippy vaporware. I'm not just giving you a bunch of aspirational goals. These things are backed by science. We already know from studies that an educational best practice is helping students develop their problem-solving and decision-making skills. That schools should be doing that to get the best results. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a section on your IEP that says goal setting and problem solving. Not a horrible thing to have. It doesn't mean you have to have it. Like I've shown you from I statements, we can build these into where they already have to be. We already have to have, English composition goals. Why can't we incorporate decision-making, problem-solving, and self-determination in them? We already have to have behavior goals. Every time you have to do a functional behavioral assessment, why aren't we building in opportunities for figuring out student self-reflection? It's always part of the antecedent behavior consequence start. But how do we figure out how to build self-determination from it? So that's a real opportunity because, I love the quote on the screen right now, because when you ask yourself why guardianship happens, it's always, some version of this quote is that if a person can't take care of themselves, they need a guardian. That's what Ohio law says, right? If a person is incapable of managing his or her affairs or life, they are incompetent. Well, guardianship happens when a person can't take care of themselves the way society thinks they take care of themselves. Well, school is a perfect opportunity to build that skill, especially in transition services. Transition services are my personal favorite part of the IEP process. For those of you who have children who are in their mid to late teens, you're already in transition. Transition happens between age 14 and 16, and it's designed to plan for the rest of your life. Special education is so important, but it ends. There comes a point where the student graduates, right? Transition planning is designed to start setting the student up for those next 50 years, the supports and services that student's going to need for the rest of his or her life. And look at what the law says about transition services. It's supposed to focus on education, employment, and independent living opportunities through things like vocational education and community participation to give the student the best chance to experience those. And at the bottom, transition services should include developing post-school adult living objectives and the acquisition of daily living skills. And while I don't have time to go into this in the most detail I'd love to, let me just say this. What is a more important adult living objective than directing your own life? What is a more important daily living skill than making good decisions? What is more connected to education, employment, independent living than self-determination, as we've seen from 40 years of studies? So transition planning is the perfect time to start developing ideas, linking to adult supports, bringing in other opportunities, bringing in other agencies. I have a project going in Perry County. I did one in Pickaway County a couple of years ago that was all about that, working with a school and other agencies to put together transition supports and services that focus on self-determination. That's what transition services can do. The school may have concerns. Like I told you, the number one referral source for guardianship are schools. Well, if a school comes to me and as I hope they would, as my child is 14, 15, and 16 and says, we have real concerns about, your son's ability to manage his life, to make decisions, to be independent. That gives us an opportunity in transition supports to develop independent living supports and community agencies, adult services to help address that, so that guardianship doesn't seem like a fait accompli, the only thing we can do. It becomes we have to consider what else we can do before we say guardianship is our last choice. And rather than recommending guardianship for the first time at age 17 at transfer of rights, I would love to see a school go to a parent at 14, 15, or 16 and say, this are the things that we have to work on to help the student develop the daily living skill of decision-making to address the adult objective of independence, and these are the things we're going to do to get there. That should be a transition goal rather than guardianship being the transition endpoint. But supported decision-making doesn't only happen in special education. In fact, like I told you, it is a lifetime process. It fits in special education beautifully, but there are so many other supports and services that people with disabilities, parents and teachers must know about and can take full advantage of to build those skills. My favorite of those is called vocational rehabilitation, or VR. VR is a program that is available to every single person with a disability. It is designed to help people with disabilities work. In fact, that's what the law says. If it is involved in helping a person with a disability prepare for, secure, retain, advance, or regain employment, it's covered by VR. That means anything that will help a person with a disability get ready to get a job, keep a job, advance in a job, or get a job back is something the VR program can help with. Every state has a VR agency. In Ohio, it's called OOD, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. I've worked with OOD in several Ohio counties, and their website is on your screen right now. The reason I'm telling you about OOD is that list of the things one needs to prepare for, secure, retain, advance, or regain employment. Well, that means anything a person needs to work can be gotten through OOD, including decision-making and self-determination. And I've fought with VRs across the country on this, and I'll just give you a quick example where VR says it's not our job to teach self-determination. It's not our job to teach self-care. It's not our job to teach good decision-making. And I say, wait a second, would you hire somebody who has such poor judgment they can't follow your policy manual? No. Then self-determination and decision-making is an employment skill, isn't it? If a person needs that to work, then VR can provide it. Would you retain someone who doesn't get along with coworkers or customers? No. Well, then interpersonal skills and decision-making is a job skill if the person needs that. Would you promote someone who takes such poor care of their health that they're always missing work and getting people sick? No, of course not. Then self-care and self-determination are job skills. So if there are things people need to work, VR can cover it, including those things around self-care and self-determination. And like I told you, every single person with a disability can apply for VR. To get VR services, the only things that you need are to have a disability, to want to work, to have your disability make it harder for you to work, and for VR to help you, to be able to help you. If you get public benefits like SSI or SSDI, Medicare or Medicaid, you're presumed eligible. So it is very hard to not be eligible for VR. So I always recommend parents and people with disabilities to apply for VR because the supports and services that are available are amazing. Once you're found eligible, you get to have a plan called an individualized plan for employment, which, just like an IEP, I know they sound alike, are all about setting goals and coming up with the supports and services you need to get them. So with an IPE, you will say, I want to try to get this job. And you and your counselor work together to figure out what the best job for you is and what you need to get there. And the supports and services are extensive. Under VR, you can get things like job coaches and job assessments and counseling and assistive technology and medical and mental health care, even things like transportation. When I ask people what's stopping people with disabilities from working, someone always says transportation. Transportation is a VR service. So you can get the things you need to work, but look at the things there that also can apply to decision-making. Counseling and technology, education is one of the VR goals, on-the-job training, all of which can help you develop your decision-making and self-determination skills. And just like we talked about the student-led IEP being supported decision-making, SDM is built into VR as well, because OOD, I have a typo, it says DHS on the screen, I apologize. OOD must ensure that you can exercise informed choice. This is what informed choice is. There's a definition on your screen. I can talk about it better. Your VR counselor is required to work with you to help you understand what your options are, to help you figure out what job is best for you by the counselor giving you information, telling you what jobs are available, what your skills might match up with jobs so that you can decide what job is best for you. Your counselor is required to give you information and options about the supports and services that are available under these projects so that you can pick the supports and services best for you. The counselor's job is to support you and give you information so that you can decide what to do. Doesn't that sound like supported decision-making? And VR is available to kids in school. If you've got a kid in school, I'm talking right to teachers and administrators and to parents. If you've got a kid in transition, VR should be a part of the IEP process. There is a VR program called Pre-Employment Transition Services, or Pre-ETS. Pre-ETS are available to any student and are required to be provided to all students who have IEPs or 504 plans, and they provide specific supports and services to students. I don't have time to go through all of them, but look at the bottom. Instruction in self-advocacy. Look at the one above it. Readiness training skills to develop social skills and independent living. That's supported decision-making, and that's self-determination. So through VR, students in school can get supports and services that go hand in hand with the transition supports and services the schools are already providing to help the students develop those self-determination, independent living, and job skills that they're going to need for the 50 years after they graduate. But it doesn't stop there, because employment skills and education skills are part of life, but so is healthcare. The number 2 reason I hear about guardianship are for healthcare management. I need this for my son and my daughter because they can't manage their health. And I hear it from doctors. People with disabilities can't manage their health. They can't do informed consent. Well, informed consent is a perfect time for supported decision-making. Again, think about your typical doctor's appointment. I tell the doctor what's wrong. The doctor tells me what they recommend. I choose whether or not to do it. That's a doctor's appointment. And the key part here is the doctor has to understand what's wrong with me from what I'm telling the doctor. I have to understand what the doctor is recommending, what course of action to take, what medication to take, and I have to be able to understand that so I can decide what to do. That's a perfect time for supported decision-making. Remember, if one of us doesn't understand the other, the system breaks down. So supported decision-making can be just as easy as saying, "Doctor, please explain that to me in English, in plain English." Or it can be just as easy as having someone there with you at the doctor's appointment so that we can talk together so that I understand the doctor and the doctor understands me. That's the point of supported decision-making. With supported decision-making at a time when I might not be able to understand the doctor because I'm nervous or I'm not feeling well or I have an intellectual or mental disability, I can have a person there to help me understand the doctor. At a time when the doctor might understand me, might think I need a guardian because I have a disability, there can be a person there to make sure that we understand each other. And it gives family members and friends and people an opportunity to be part of the process, so that people who might otherwise need a guardian, or people who think they need a guardian, now have a way to be front and center in the decision-making process with support of the people who care for them in their lives. That's what SDM is. It's sharing information, right? That's what the informed decision-making process is. Information goes to the doctor, information comes from the doctor to me, a choice is made by me. That's what we do. We go through a system where I explain to the doctor, perhaps with help from a supporter. The doctor makes a recommendation to me that the supporter can help me understand. I can talk with my supporter about what to do and then decide what to do. It is something that happens in medical appointments around the country every day. For people without disabilities, it's pretty natural. I have discussed opportunities for my medical care with my wife all the time. I was with my wife when a doctor recommended surgery. We discussed together about what to do. We discussed with the doctor the situation. We engaged in supported decision-making. That's a way that people with disabilities can be a full and equal member. And just a quick word, if there's any concern about HIPAA, about medical privacy, that's not really a concern, because if you think about it, sometimes doctors will say, I can't have a supporter in the room because that would violate HIPAA or the Medical Privacy Act. Well, think about every time you go to the doctor, you fill out a form that says privacy notice or HIPAA notice that actually says the doctor won't share your information with anyone, and gives you an opportunity to fill in a person's name at the bottom with whom they can share that information. That's just a way to do supported decision-making. So at that bottom of the form where you can say who it's okay to share information with, where I always put my wife's name down when in doubt, you can also say, I'm putting this person's name in to help me make decisions. I want this person, I want you to share information with my mother, my brother, my husband, my wife, my friend, so they can help me make decisions about my medical care. And just like that, you've created supported decision-making. And we can do that with powers of attorney and advanced directives. I know I'm flying through this, and I promise you we will do this in a lot more detail in the spring. I just want you to have an overview of times when supported decision-making can work. Well, think about powers of attorney and advanced directives. Powers of attorney and advanced directives both say the same thing. God forbid something happens to me. I want this person who knows me to make decisions. Well, we can write powers of attorney and advanced directives that include supported decision-making. I can say, God forbid something happens to me. I want my wife to make decisions for me, but here's how she's going to do it. I can write a very detailed advanced directives that actually list types of decisions that I don't want her to make. Things that I always want to say. I never want to be restrained. I never agree to be medicated against my will. We can say, you will always talk to me before making a decision for me. We can even say, I'm giving you the authority to make decisions when I can't, but when I am able to make decisions, I want you to come to the doctor with me to make sure I understand the doctor and the doctor understands me. And just like that, we have a supported decision-making agreement that says what happens when I can't make decisions and how I want to make decisions with support when I can. That's all about supported decision-making. Those of you who work in Medicaid waiver programs, if your child or you are receiving supports and services through a Medicaid-funded system, you've probably heard the term person-centered planning. Well, person-centered planning is required in every Medicaid waiver. And what person-centered planning says is that as part of the Medicaid waiver program, we are supposed to make a very specific plan about how we're going to address the person's support needs and how we're going to set up their supports and services. But the idea of this plan is it has to reflect what the person wants. It has to say the person's goals. So we're going to have areas of their life, like around community participation, employment, income, healthcare, and wellness. We're going to make a plan that says how we're going to address what the person wants and do what the person needs. Well, we have Medicaid funded stuff that says how we do person-centered planning. We figure out what's important to the person, what's important for the person. We talk to the person about what they want, who they want in their life, what they don't want in their life, what kind of supports and services they're interested in, what they want to do and what they don't want to do. With the idea being, by going through this process, we are going to find out what kind of supports and services the person wants, when they want them, and how they want them, so the person can say, this is what I want and this is what I want to do with you. Isn't that supported decision-making? So supported decision-making follows us in education, employment, in healthcare. It follows us. And in fact, for students who are receiving Medicaid, teachers, administrators, I'm talking right to you. If you have students that receive Medicaid and you, school, agree to become a Medicaid provider, then anything medical in a student's IEP is covered by Medicaid first. I have had schools across the country say to me, we'd love to be able to provide wraparound services. We'd love to be able to provide more OT, more PT, more speech, but we don't have the funding to do it. And I always tell them, if you become a Medicaid provider, it's a paperwork exercise. And you have a student who receives Medicaid, which is the technical term for that is called early and periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment. If you have someone who gets EPSDT, then anything in an IEP that's medical in nature is covered by Medicaid dollars, not your dollars. So there is a way for schools to work with Medicaid to support students to be more independent. There are other sources out there to help you. One is called the Center for Independent Living. There are centers for independent living in every county in Ohio, serving areas throughout the state. You can find your local Center for Independent Living at the website on your screen. The whole point of a Center for Independent Living is to help people with disabilities identify and get the services and supports to help them be independent, to avoid institutionalization, to have more self-determination, to have more opportunities. And the awesome thing about CILs, Centers for Independent Living, is they provide all these things you see on your screen: counseling and training and supports and services, but the majority of CIL employees must be themselves people with disabilities. So if you are working with a CIL, if you are a parent and your child is working with a CIL, they're going to be learning supports and services and self-determination and options from people who've had to do it themselves. So they're going to be learning self-determination and supported decision-making skills from people who've had to develop those skills themselves. It is an opportunity to give your child more chances to develop. And supported decision-making doesn't stop there. We can do supported decision-making in money management. Again, we can create a power of attorney that gives instead of saying you can't manage your money at all, I did a power of attorney that put a student on a budget that said you can spend up to this amount of dollars every month. Anything more than that, mom has to say, okay. But in making that discussion, mom can't just say yes or no unless you discuss it first, because it gives you, kid, an opportunity to say why you think you should be able to buy this thing or get this thing. And mom can say yes or no. Mom might say yes because you're right. Mom might say no because you don't have the money right now, but that gives you an opportunity to work together to create a budget. That gives you the opportunity to set up a support system so that you can learn to manage your money better. That's where self-determination can make you better with your money. And for those of you who have students who receive SSI or SSDI, very, very often that's thought to be a life sentence of poverty. I hear parents across the country tell me, my child can't work, my child can't live independently, because if they work, they might lose their benefits. So I want to tell you real quickly about a program called ABLE, because you know it's a terrifying situation. If you're getting SSI or SSDI, you're told you can't have more than $2,000 to your name. So if you earn money, if you have money, you can lose the benefits you need that help you stay healthy. Well, ABLE, called Achieving a Better Life Experience, is a special program that can help people with disabilities earn and save money. The project in Ohio is called the Stable Account. Link on your screen, stableaccount.com. What a stable account lets you do is contribute $15,000 a year into an account that does not count against your benefits. So a person getting SSI or SSDI can work. They can put up to $15,000 a year into an ABLE account, or have people put money into an ABLE account for them, and it grows tax-free. And as long as you have less than $102,000 in that account, it has no impact on your benefits. So imagine a program that lets people with disabilities on benefits, who you traditionally are told they can't work, they can't have money, they can't spend money, now can earn and save up to $102,000 tax-free before it has any impact on benefits. And all you have to do to be eligible for an ABLE account is to be receiving benefits, SSI, SSDI, Medicare, Medicaid, or you would be eligible if you applied, but you haven't applied yet. A doctor certifies you would be eligible. With that, you can get an ABLE account. That money can grow tax-free, that you can use for just about anything. Education expenses, housing, employment, healthcare, life necessities. The whole point of an ABLE account is to give people with disabilities on benefits equal opportunities. The story I love about ABLE is the person I know who was afraid to work because she was on benefits, but she opened an ABLE account and got a minimum wage job at a hospital. And she earned money and put it into her ABLE account. And after a year or so, she took some out to pay for some job training, which helped her get a better job and earn more money and put it into her ABLE account, which helped her pay for more training or transportation, which helped her have a better job and a better life. This person used her ABLE account to continue to get better jobs and is no longer on benefits because she no longer needs them. She's earned enough money and she has a job now that provides healthcare that's full-time, a job she couldn't have gotten before her ABLE account. So it's a way to do things, and why I'm talking about them is when a person with a disabilities has an ABLE account, they're responsible for managing it. The person with disabilities is responsible for deciding what money goes in, how it comes out, and how it's managed. That is a perfect opportunity for supported decision-making. If the whole point of the ABLE Act is more quality of life, is more independence, then what a perfect time to use supported decision-making. You as a parent or a teacher making recommendations can talk about opening an ABLE account to access and manage money. And the last thing I want to say about supported decision-making is bringing it together. We're going to talk about this in detail in the spring, but I have done programs in 2 Ohio counties, and the one on your screen is in Vermont. The whole point of the program was to bring together supports and services around self-determination for students at risk of guardianship. We did one in Vermont for a year with students at the most risk of guardianship, bringing together supports and services, using supported decision-making to help build and support systems, and not one kid went into guardianship. And every single student, parent, counselor, supporter said it was providing better supports and services and helped better identify needs. Why? Because it enhanced self-determination. Supported decision-making and self-determination going hand in hand, as long as we remember that first commandment of supported decision-making. We recognize and respect everyone's right to make choices. We get away from the idea that guardianship is our only choice, that 1500 years after Justinian, we have no other options. I know it's hard. The things I'm telling you are changing the way it's always been. I have put forth to you a ton of information. And by the way, when we get back together in December, I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your concerns. I want you to tell me, Jonathan, this won't work for my kid, or how can I make this work for my student? Because it can be hard. But every time we do something new, it is hard, and it gets easier every time we do it. Every time we help one kid, the next kid we help, it's going to be easier. Jenny Hatch's case took a year. Ryan King's case took a day. Other cases don't even go to court because people recognize that this is a way to do it. So when we work with students in school, the first time we try to set up a student-led IEP, it's not going to be easy. But the point is, it's not supposed to be easy the first time. Nothing was ever promised that it would be easy. There is no teacher, no administrator, no educational professional who got into their field because they thought it was going to be easy. They got into it because it's hard, because they care about your kids, because they care about your students, because they will put the work in. And when we put the work in, great things happen. Great things happen. I showed you every picture of those people who were in guardianship and got out. Every teacher can tell you their favorite success stories of students they worked with who they never thought would be able to be successful, who were successful. So if we focus on self-determination, if we focus on decision-making, we can make great things happen. We can ensure that people with disabilities are just people. That's what I always say, is we got to get to a place where one day all these supports and services end, special education ends, work projects end, some healthcare ends. So at the end, it's not people with disabilities using supported decision-making. It is and has to be people living their lives. And that is the last thing I want to say to you. That is our challenge, to go from this idea of 1,500 years of Justinian, that people with disabilities are somehow different and apart and need someone to manage their life, and get to our Declaration of Independence, that each and every one of us has full and equal rights, and each and every one of us needs the help we need to make those rights a reality. It has absolutely been my honor. You can feel free to email me anytime at that address. And I look very forward to coming back and talking with you in December so we can discuss specifics in your life and the lives of people you care about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan, very much for all that overview and information today. I know my mind is spinning with potential questions, so I presume the group as well will have questions to contribute, and I'll try to get that. I'll try to get some questions collected and sent to you ahead of our December session, so you can kind of look through those. But just logistics. Session 2, remember, is going to be on December 1st from 9:30 to 11 virtually, using the same link that you used today. You will also be sent a reminder email when the time gets closer. And then session 3 is April 5th. We're going to be hosting Jonathan in person, which we're super excited about here at the ESC of Central Ohio on Citygate Drive. That is an all-day event starting at about 9:30. There will be a lunch break around 11:30, just as a so if you need to make arrangements or planning around that. Within the next week, you will receive an email, follow-up email if you participated today, with the link to the materials that Jonathan is going to email me. Will be in that folder, and there'll also be a document in there to add questions that you might have, discussion topics, concerns, whatever that may be, to help contribute to that session in December. If you also have other questions, concerns, you don't want to necessarily, you don't have to put your name on the question sheet, but if you want to just send that directly to me, you can also do that, and I will put my email address in the chat box right now for you, so you have that. But we want to thank everybody for being here today. I know it was a ton of information in what a short period of time we had, but that was some of our intention in bringing Jonathan back in the spring, as well as finally getting to meet you in person, Jonathan. We're excited about that. So if you have any questions, like I said, please follow up via email. My email address is in the chat box. Also, Jonathan through his email out there. If there's things you want to speak directly to him about, he's very responsive and personal. Personable in the sense that we'll address that issue for you specifically. So, Jonathan, once again, thank you very much. This information, last year to this year, I feel like I've grown even in my understanding. With supported decision-making, we, are having more conversations around it in our districts here. So the message is definitely getting out, and our transition team is looking to, kind of build that out as part of our technical assistance and support we provide districts and parents. So thank you again, wishing you all the best coming up Thanksgiving holiday. Take a breather, and then finish the home stretch here for the first semester, and we will see you in December.
Thank you so much, everyone.